Hey everyone! Welcome back to Gringotts Hub. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Harry claimed the Potter-Black-Slytherin-Peverell Lordship and legally abolished the Ministry of Magic? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Reading of the Blood. The owl arrived on Harry's birthday at exactly midnight. Not the soft, uncertain kind of arrival that Hedwig sometimes made when she was being polite about waking him. This was a sharp, deliberate rap of talons against glass, 3 times, like a knock at a door. Harry was already awake. He'd been awake for an hour, lying on his back in the dark of number 4, Privet Drive, listening to the Dursleys sleep and thinking about Sirius. He opened the window without turning on the light. The owl that stepped inside was enormous, a great tawny bird with amber eyes that caught the streetlight and held it like coins. Around its leg were 2 scrolls, one sealed in black wax stamped with AG, and one sealed in deep green wax that bore an emblem Harry didn't recognize, a serpent swallowing its own tail, and inside the circle it made, a triangle with an eye at its center. He took both. The owl accepted a strip of dried meat from the bag he kept under his mattress, drank from Hedwig's water dish without being invited, and left. Harry sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the scrolls for a long moment. Hedwig watched him from her cage with the particular expression she reserved for moments when she thought he was being slow. He opened the black-waxed one first. Mr. H. J. Potter, you are respectfully summoned to Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, on the morning of your 16th birthday, for the purposes of an inheritance reading and blood right confirmation as pertaining to the estates, vaults, titles, and lordships held in trust under the Potter, Black, and associated family names. This summons is legally binding under Goblin Treaty Clause 7, Article 3, which supersedes all ministry travel restrictions, Hogwarts guardianship clauses, and personal recognizance orders currently in effect. Failure to attend will result in the automatic transfer of all held assets to secondary claimants. Director Ragnarok, Gringotts Bank, London. Harry read it twice. Then he opened the green-sealed scroll. This one was older. The parchment felt different under his fingers, heavier, like it had been waiting longer. The writing was in a deep, dark ink that shifted slightly when he tilted it toward the light, and the handwriting was not hurried. Whoever had written this had taken their time. To the heir of Peverell, you will know when to read this because Gringotts will have already told you where to go. When you arrive, you will ask Director Ragnarok to add one name to the inheritance reading, Peverell. They will tell you it is impossible. Tell them Ignotus sends his regards, and show them the stone. You have always carried it. You know which one. Harry stopped breathing for a second. His hand went, without thinking, to the small pouch he wore around his neck under his shirt, the one that had held the resurrection stone. Except he dropped the stone in the forbidden forest. Hadn't he? He opened the pouch. The stone sat in his palm, smooth and dark, the crack running across its face where it had split under his foot. Except he was nearly certain he'd felt it crack. He was nearly certain he'd left it there on the forest floor. He closed his fingers around it. All right, he said quietly to the empty room. He didn't sleep after that. Getting out of Privet Drive turned out to be considerably easier than any of the 17 escape plans Harry had mentally drafted over the years, because it turned out that a Gringotts summons, when presented to the 2 order members watching the house, produced an expression of complete bafflement followed by the hasty consultation of a very thick book. The book, apparently, confirmed that Goblin Treaty Clause 7, Article 3 was indeed real, and that nobody, not Dumbledore, not the Ministry, not the Order, had the legal authority to prevent Harry from responding to it. Mundungus Fletcher drove him to the leaky cauldron in a car that smelled of something Harry chose not to identify. He was quiet the whole way, which was fine by Harry. Diagon Alley was quiet in the early morning, shopkeepers sweeping stoops and the bakery on the corner sending warm smells out into the summer air. Harry walked through it with his hands in his pockets and the 2 scrolls tucked inside his jacket, and he looked at the familiar cobblestones and the familiar storefronts and thought that he'd spent the better part of 6 years walking through this place feeling like a visitor. He pushed open the door of Gringotts. The goblin at the nearest desk looked up at him. Then it looked at him again, more carefully, and Harry noticed it sit just slightly straighter. "Mr. Potter," it said. "You're expected. Please follow Grimtooth." A different goblin appeared from somewhere, shorter, older, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old wood and then left out in the rain for a century. It didn't offer any greeting. It simply turned and walked, and Harry followed. They went deeper into Gringotts than Harry had ever been before, past the main banking hall, down a corridor lined with doors that had no handles, through a room that smelled of stone and old magic, and into a chamber that was clearly not used for tourist purposes. The ceiling was low. The walls were covered in carved script that Harry couldn't read. In the center of the room was a stone table, and behind it sat a goblin who was older than any Harry had ever seen, so old that the word felt insufficient. Ancient was closer. The kind of ancient that had watched empires rise and collapse and filed the paperwork afterward. "Director Ragnarok," said Harry. "Sit down, Mr. Potter." The voice was dry as old parchment, but not unfriendly. "You came alone." "I did. Most humans bring witnesses to inheritance readings." "Most humans," Harry agreed, sitting down across from him, "don't have whatever this is." He set the green-sealed scroll on the table. Ragnarok looked at it. His expression did not change, which Harry was already learning meant that something significant was happening behind it. "Where did you get this?" "It was delivered with your summons." "That is not possible." "This seal," Ragnarok stopped. He picked up the scroll with both hands, turned it over, and held it close to one of the candles on the table. The seal seemed to pulse once in the light. "This has not been unsealed in 300 years. "And yet," said Harry. A pause that went on for a while. Then Ragnarok set the scroll down and looked at Harry with those coin-bright eyes and said, "You have something else." Harry put the resurrection stone on the table. The silence in the room changed character entirely. It went from professional to something much older and much stiller. Grimtooth, who had been standing by the door, made a sound that was not quite words. Ragnarok looked at the stone for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry. "Ignotus Peverell's cloak was confirmed in your Potter family records," he said. "The wand was lost, presumably destroyed. But the stone." He shook his head very slowly. "3 times in a millennium has this bank seen one of the hallows on this table. You understand what this means?" "I'm beginning to," said Harry. "I'd like you to add Peverell to the inheritance reading." "The standard response to that request," said Ragnarok, "is that it is impossible. The Peverell line is considered legally extinct, the lordship lapsed, the vault sealed and folded into." He stopped again. "Into the Potter vault," Harry said. Ragnarok tilted his head. "Into the Potter vault." "Yes. Which means it wasn't extinct. It was waiting." Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, because goblins did not smile in the human way, but something that lived in the same neighborhood. "It was waiting," he agreed. "You understand that what we are about to confirm today is not a small thing. I understand it's going to cause an enormous amount of trouble for a very large number of people," said Harry. "And I've decided that's all right." Ragnarok nodded once, as though this answer satisfied him in some fundamental way. He reached under the table and produced a shallow stone basin, not unlike a pensieve, but uncarved, raw. He set it between them. Then he produced a small silver knife, handle first, and placed it beside the basin. "The blood rite is simple," he said. 3 drops. 1 for each generation you claim. The blood will confirm or deny what the records suggest. What the blood confirms, no legal body in Britain, including the Ministry of Magic, can contest. "Including the Ministry," Harry repeated. "There are laws older than the Ministry, Mr. Potter. Considerably older. The Ministry exists at the pleasure of the ancient houses. Most people have simply forgotten this." He paused. "Or been encouraged to forget." Harry picked up the knife. He nicked his palm without hesitation, a quick, clean cut, and let 3 drops fall into the basin. The blood hit the stone and spread out, and then it did something that blood had no business doing, it began to glow. Not red. Deep gold. Then beneath the gold, a thread of silver. Then a vein of green so dark it was almost black. Then something that wasn't quite a color at all, more like the suggestion of light just before dawn, the kind that exists at the edge of vision and disappears when you look directly at it. Ragnarok watched it with the expression of someone witnessing the confirmation of a very old theory. "Speak the names," he said quietly. "James Harold Potter," Harry said. His voice was steady. "Charles Potter. Henry Potter." He paused. "And before them?" "The Potter line connects laterally to Peverell through the female line. Iolanthe Peverell married Hardwin Potter in 1212. The blood remembers even when the name changes." Ragnarok indicated the scroll. "Continue." Harry took a breath. "Sirius Orion Black. Arcturus Black." He paused again. "Phineas Nigellus Black. And before?" "The Black family charter predates the ministry by 4 centuries. The lordship is intact." Ragnarok's eyes were fixed on the basin. The silver thread had thickened into something more substantial. "Continue." The next name felt strange in his mouth, familiar in a way that had nothing to do with memory. Salazar Slytherin. The green deepened. The candlelight seemed to contract slightly, as though the room wanted to pay attention. "The Slytherin line," Ragnarok said, and now his voice had dropped to something very deliberate, "passed through the female line to Morfinn Gaunt, and from Gaunt to Merrippy Gaunt," Harry said. "Who had a son?" "Tom Marvolo Riddle." He met Ragnarok's eyes. "Who then called himself Voldemort and abandoned his claim." "What happens to an abandoned lordship claim?" "It reverts," Ragnarok said, "to the nearest living heir of the original line who has not abandoned their claim." He looked at Harry steadily. Iolanthe Peverell's marriage to Hardwin Potter also connected a secondary Slytherin line, as Salazar Slytherin had 2 children. The younger daughter's line moved to the continent and eventually, came back through the Potters, Harry finished. "Yes. So when Riddle abandoned his claim, the Slytherin lordship reverted to you. You are the only living heir of 2 Slytherin descendants, one through the Gaunt line, one through the Potter-Peverell line. The blood confirms this." Ragnarok gestured at the basin. The deep green had wrapped around the gold and the silver, not consuming them but binding them, creating something that looked less like a mixing of colors and more like a weaving. "And finally." Harry looked down at the stone on the table. Then back at Ragnarok. "Ignotus Peverell," he said. The 4th thread, that almost color, that pre-dawn light, flooded the basin. And for just a moment, the room was very, very bright. Then it settled. 4 colors, wound together like a braid, pulsing with a slow and completely steady rhythm. Ragnarok sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a long moment. Grimtooth by the door had not moved at all. "Lord Potter-Black-Slytherin-Peverell," Ragnarok said, and the title landed in the room with an almost physical weight, "the bank recognizes your claims as confirmed. You hold 4 lordships. You are the head of 4 ancient and noble houses, 3 of which are founding houses of the Wisengamot, which means, that I hold 3 founding votes," Harry said. He'd done the reading. More accurately, he'd had about 6 hours on the night bus last night. He'd stopped at Flourish and Blots before the reading, which had produced another interesting expression on a goblin's face when he'd explained why he needed the complete text of the Wisengamot's founding charter at 7 in the morning, and he'd read fast. The Peverell seat was retired when the line appeared to go extinct, but a founding lord can reinstate a retired seat. Correct. Ragnarok was watching him with something that had moved well past professional interest. You have 4 votes in the Wisengamot, Mr. Potter. 3 are founding votes, which carry veto authority over ministry-derived legislation under the original charter. 1 is a lord seat, which carries 2 proxy votes that can be assigned. I also, Harry said carefully, hold the Slytherin seat, which was never formally incorporated into the ministry's structure, because Salazar Slytherin specifically excluded his lordship from any governmental body when he left Hogwarts. It was written into the original founding documents of the school. The pause that followed was the most significant one yet. "You have read the Hogwarts founding charter," Ragnock said. "I found a copy in the Potter Library records you sent me." Harry hadn't known the Potter Library existed until the summons had included a catalogue. He'd read the catalogue on the bus. He'd been a very busy 16-year-old in the last 12 hours. The Slytherin clause states that the Slytherin Lordship exists outside all political structures and answers only to magical law as it predates the establishment of any governing body. Which means, that the Slytherin Lordship is not subject to ministry authority, Ragnock said. At all. On any matter. He folded his hands on the table. "Mr. Potter, you understand that this information is legally dangerous." "I understand that it's legally powerful," Harry said. "Which isn't the same thing." "No," Ragnock agreed. "It is not." He was quiet for a moment. "I should tell you that Albus Dumbledore was notified of this inheritance reading." Harry's jaw tightened just slightly. "When?" 3 days ago, when the summons was prepared. It is standard procedure to notify the magical guardian of a minor. "What did he say?" "He requested that we delay the reading until after the conclusion of what he called, the current conflict. He suggested that confirming your lordships at this time might be destabilizing to the war effort." Ragnock held Harry's gaze. "We declined. Gringotts does not delay legal proceedings at the request of political figures, regardless of their reputation." Harry absorbed this. He thought about Dumbledore, about the man who had let him live in a cupboard for 10 years and called it protection, who had known about the Horcruxes and fed him pieces of the picture 1 year at a time, who had never once asked him what he wanted. He thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. "What are the full assets?" he asked. Ragnock produced a document from somewhere. It was long. Harry took it and read it while Ragnock waited, and the silence was companionable in the way that silence between two people who respect efficiency tends to be. The Potter vault was substantial: old money, generations of accumulated wealth, several properties, a seat in the Wisengamot that had been sitting empty since his father's death. The Black Vault was staggering. The Black family had been collecting wealth and property for 6 centuries with the focused determination of people who genuinely enjoyed owning things. Grimmauld Place was the smallest property on the list. There were ancestral seats in Scotland, Ireland, France. There was a library that made the Hogwarts restricted section look modest. There were Black family heirlooms that had been sitting in stasis for decades, waiting. The Slytherin vault was the one that made Harry go still for a moment. It was not the gold, though there was gold, more of it than he could meaningfully process. It was the contents. Books. Artifacts. Scrolls predating the ministry by 8 centuries. The accumulated magical knowledge of Salazar Slytherin himself, sealed against everyone who was not his acknowledged heir, which meant they had been sealed since Tom Riddle had renounced his claim. The Peverell vault was small and contained almost nothing except a box, and written on the outside of the box was a sentence in Old English that Harry couldn't read but that Ragnock translated as, "For the one who comes after. You will know what to do when the time is right." "The invisibility cloak," Ragnock said. "The stone you carry. The wand is not recorded. But the original Peverell estates," he indicated a line in the document. "Godric's Hollow." Harry looked up. The original Peverell holding included the land now known as Godric's Hollow, Ragnock said. "The property transferred through the line to the Potters. It is yours, Mr. Potter. The cottage, once restored, and the surrounding land." Harry looked down at the document for a moment. He'd been to Godric's Hollow once, in 4th year, when Dumbledore had taken him to see where his parents had died. He'd stood in front of the ruined wall and felt the particular hollow feeling of grief that has nowhere to go. The thought of it being his, of it being something he could rebuild, did something to his chest that he chose not to examine right now. "One more thing," he said. He reached into his jacket and took out a folded piece of parchment, part of his 6-hour overnight study session. The Black family charter includes a provision for wrongful imprisonment. A Lord of House Black can petition for the immediate release of a family member held without proper conviction. He slid it across the table. Sirius Black was never tried. He was imprisoned by ministry order, without a Wisengamot hearing, which under both ministry law and the Black family charter constitutes wrongful imprisonment. As Lord of House Black, I am formally petitioning for his immediate release and for the automatic expungement of his record, on the grounds that no conviction exists to expunge. Ragnarok read the document. His face was, as always, controlled, but there was something at the edges of it that might have been approval. Gringotts will witness and validate this petition, he said. Under Goblin Treaty law, a validated petition by a recognized lord carries equal legal weight to a Wisengamot ruling. The ministry will be required to acknowledge Sirius Black's free status. He paused. They will not be pleased. They never are, Harry said. He picked up the stone from the table, looked at it for a moment, and put it back in the pouch. I'll need access to all 4 vaults today. And I'll need to speak with your legal department about the founding charter documents, specifically the provisions regarding ministerial overreach and the original authority vested in the ancient houses. Ragnarok watched him for a moment that was long and measuring. You came here expecting to pick up some gold and sign some papers, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I came here expecting to find out what I actually have, Harry said. There's a difference. Indeed there is. Ragnarok stood, which, given his height, involved less vertical movement than Harry expected, but was no less formal for it. One more thing, Lord Potter-Black-Slytherin-Peverell. The title is yours legally and completely. But titles held in paper are not titles held in stone. The ancestral seats of each house will need to be formally claimed, visited, and accepted. When? The magical binding that confirms a lord's authority requires physical presence at the ancestral seat within 30 days of the blood right confirmation. After that period, the claim becomes contestable by any secondary heir. I'll go today, Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him. All 4. Can it be done? Potter Manor in Wiltshire. Black ancestral seat in Scotland, Blackthorn Hold. The Slytherin seat is Serpent's Rest in the Somerset Marshes. It has been sealed and warded for 400 years. He paused meaningfully. And the Peverell seat? Godric's Hollow, Ragnarok said. Which is the only one currently habitable. Right, Harry said. I'll need a portkey schedule and any navigation documents the bank holds for the sealed properties. He stood, and straightened, and in the low candlelight of the old room he looked considerably less like a boy in second-hand clothes than he had when he'd walked in. Not because anything had changed about his face or his height or his too large jacket. But something behind his eyes was different. Settled. And I'll need the documents prepared for Sirius's release so that I can deliver them personally. You plan to free him yourself? He's been waiting 12 years, Harry said. I think he deserves to hear it from family. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something Harry had never seen a goblin do in any of his admittedly limited social interactions with goblins. He bowed. Not deeply, it was more of a precise and deliberate inclination of the head, but it was unmistakably a bow, and it was unmistakably meant. The bank will prepare everything, Ragnarok said. Will you require an escort? No, Harry said. Thank you. He walked back through the corridor of handleless doors and the room that smelled of old magic and stone, and out into the main banking hall, and the goblins at the counters glanced at him as he passed, and something moved through the hall, a ripple of awareness that Harry couldn't name but could feel, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. He stepped out into Diagon Alley, and the summer morning was warm and smelled of bread and cobblestones, and Harry stood on the steps of Gringotts for a moment with the documents under his arm and the pouch at his chest and the knowledge sitting in him like ballast, heavy and stabilizing, and thought, very clearly and calmly, all right. Let's begin. He sent a Patronus to Hermione first, because Hermione would need the most time to process this, and processing time was something Harry no longer had to spare. The silver stag galloped out of his wand tip and he spoke to it quickly, "Come to Diagon Alley. Bring Ron. Don't tell anyone where you're going. I'll explain everything when I see you." And watched it bound away into the blue summer sky. Then he walked to the apothecary, bought a strong cup of something hot and dark from the witch at the counter who ran a tea service out of the back half of her shop, and sat down at the small table in the corner with the Gringotts documents spread in front of him and began making a list. He'd always been a list maker. People tended to assume otherwise about him. People tended to assume that because he did a lot of things impulsively and loudly, he didn't plan. This was inaccurate. He planned constantly. He just didn't usually share the plans until they were already in motion. The list had 4 headings: what I have, what I need, what has to happen first, what has to happen after. He'd gotten through the first 2 headings by the time Hermione arrived, slightly out of breath and with her hair doing the thing it did when she'd been walking quickly in summer humidity. "What," she said, sitting down across from him and looking at the documents, "is all of this?" "Good morning," said Harry. "Harry." She picked up the nearest document, read 4 lines, put it down, picked up another one. Her expression went through 3 distinct phases: the politely skeptical, the cautiously intrigued, and the barely controlled intellectual excitement, in about 20 seconds. "Is this a Gringotts inheritance confirmation?" "It is." "And the blood right results?" She grabbed that document. "Harry, this shows 4 confirmed lordships." "It does." She looked up. "That's not possible. You can't hold 4 lordships simultaneously." "The Wisengamot seats alone would give me 3 founding votes and a lord seat," Harry said. "Plus 2 proxies." "Yes." Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. Ron appeared in the doorway, red-faced from running, with a pastry in one hand and an expression of philosophical readiness on his face, the expression of someone who had grown up as a Weasley and therefore had a high baseline tolerance for extraordinary situations. "Right," Ron said, pulling up a chair and sitting down and looking at the documents on the table. "What did you do?" "Inherited some things," Harry said. Ron picked up the asset summary. He read it for about 8 seconds. "Blimey." He put it down. Then he picked it up again. "Harry, this says you own most of the Scottish Highlands." "Not most. Some." "Right, only some, that's completely reasonable." Ron set it down. "Okay. So. What's the plan?" Harry turned the list around so they could both see it. He watched their faces as they read, Hermione's going sharp and focused, Ron's going quiet in the particular way that meant he was running political calculations in the back of his head, which was a thing Ron did that most people didn't realize because they'd written him off as the affable sidekick somewhere around second year and never revised the assessment. "The Ministry," Hermione said slowly, "is going to lose their minds." "Comprehensively," Harry agreed. "The founding charter provision," she was reading his notes. "Harry, I've read the founding charter, I read it in 3rd year, and I don't think it actually," she stopped. She read more carefully. "Where did you find this annotation?" "The Potter Library. I had it cross-referenced with the original Wisengamot records that Gringotts holds." "The original," she looked up. Her eyes were very bright. "The Ministry doesn't hold the original records. The Ministry holds copies. The originals are at Gringotts." "Yes," Harry said. "So the Ministry's entire legal framework for the last 2 centuries has been based on a version of the founding charter that conveniently omitted about 14 clauses," Harry said. "Including the ones about founding lord veto authority, the right of the ancient houses to convene an independent Wisengamot, and the explicit limitation of ministry power to areas not covered by pre-existing lordship law." The silence at the small table was remarkable in quality. "They just," Ron said very carefully, "left those bits out. Gradually. Over about 80 years starting after the Goblin rebellions. By the time anyone thought to check the originals were at Gringotts and the ministry had been telling everyone there was nothing significant in them for so long that nobody asked. Ron sat back in his chair. Something had shifted in his expression, the affable good humor was still there, but underneath it was something considerably sharper. "My dad works in the ministry," he said. "And his dad did. And his dad did. And all of them knew it was a mess, but nobody ever." He picked up the documents again, then put them down, then looked at Harry. "You're going to do it, aren't you?" "Do what?" "Don't give me that." Ron leaned forward. "You've got a list with 4 headings, you've been up all night, you just walked out of Gringotts with enough legal authority to sink a battleship, and you've got that look." "What look?" "The look you get when you're about to do something that Dumbledore would describe as inadvisable." Hermione was reading the founding charter annotation again. "The Ministry of Magic," she said, half to herself, "was established by the Wisingamot 1707 Charter Amendment. The original Wisingamot was established in 1217, under the authority of the ancient houses." She looked up. "The Wisingamot came first. The ministry was created by the Wisingamot to handle administrative functions. The ministry was never meant to govern independently. It was meant to administer," Harry said. "Not rule. The distinction matters." Hermione stared at him. "You're going to dissolve the Ministry of Magic." "I'm going to restore it to its proper function," Harry said. "Which is a completely different thing." There was a pause. "Right," said Ron. "I'm in." "You haven't heard the full plan," Harry said. "Mate. You're holding the Slytherin Lordship and a Peverell Hallow and Sirius is about to be freed and you found the legal document that proves the ministry has been running an unconstitutional government for 200 years. Ron picked up his pastry and took a calm, deliberate bite. "I'm in." Hermione had the expression of someone having a vigorous internal argument between the part of her that followed rules and the part of her that was deeply invested in whether or not the rules were actually legal. The second part appeared to be winning. "I need to read everything," she said. "I have copies for you," Harry said. He'd had Gringotts make them. He'd known she'd say that. She took the copies and immediately began reading with the focused intensity of someone defusing a bomb. Harry picked up his tea. Outside the apothecary window, Diagon Alley was going about its morning business, people buying ingredients and books and robes, owls overhead, the distant sound of someone testing a broomstick too close to the Quidditch supply shop. "One more thing," Harry said. "I'm going to need to visit 4 properties today. I need to formally claim each ancestral seat." He looked at them. "I'd like you both to come." Ron nodded immediately. Hermione looked up from the documents. "Today?" she said. "All 4. There's a 30-day window and I'm not waiting 30 days. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to reading. "Give me 20 minutes to get through this," she said. "Then we'll go." Harry finished his tea. Through the window, Diagon Alley glittered in the summer sun, and above it the blue sky was wide and cloudless, and somewhere in the Ministry building in London a very long chain of consequences was already beginning, set in motion by 3 drops of blood in a stone basin and a letter from a man 3 centuries dead, and none of it had started yet, not really, but it was coming. Harry could feel it the way you feel a storm, not afraid of it, but aware, bone deep and absolutely certain. He took out his list and added a 5th heading, what comes after everything else. Then he wrote one word under it, home. He folded the list, put it in his pocket, and waited for Hermione to finish reading. Chapter 2, The silence of Old Stone's Potter Manor announced itself from half a mile away. Not with gates or walls or a sign, but with the feeling. The particular quality of the air changed, the way it does when you step from a busy street into a cathedral, that sudden drop in ambient noise and the sense of something vast paying quiet attention. The taxi Harry had hired from the nearest Muggle village, because portkeys made Hermione's ears bleed and apparition was still illegal for Harry for another year, facts he'd dealt with pragmatically, pulled up on a country lane in Wiltshire, and the driver looked at the empty field ahead of them and said, "You sure this is right, son?" "Perfect," Harry said, and paid him, and they got out. The driver left. Harry stood at the edge of the lane with Hermione on his left and Ron on his right, looking at what appeared to be a very ordinary stretch of English countryside in July, knee-high grass, a line of oaks, a hill. "There's nothing there," Ron said. "There's a manor there," Harry said. "Under a Fidelius equivalent. The secret is tied to the bloodline, not a secret keeper." He reached into his jacket and took out the Gringotts document, the one listing the magical security specifications for each property. He read the activation line. Then he held out his right hand, the one he'd cut for the blood rite, the thin line of the nick still visible on his palm, and he said quietly, "I am Harry James Potter. I am Lord of House Potter. I acknowledge this estate as mine." The field shimmered. It was the only word for it, not like a spell being cast, not sudden or dramatic, but like a heat wave, a ripple of distortion passing across the landscape from some central point, and then the landscape was simply different. The hill was still there, but it had a house on it, and the house was considerable. Not ostentatious. Not a castle or a tower or anything that announced itself with architectural ego. But it was old and it was solid and it was large, the stone a deep warm grey, the windows many and the ivy thick across the eastern face, and the gardens, clearly untended for 15 years, still showed the ghost of what they'd been under the wildness that had grown over them. A long drive curved up from the lane through what had been a formal garden and was now a romantic ruin of climbing roses and overgrown lavender beds. "Oh," Hermione said softly. "Yeah," said Harry. They walked up the drive. Harry's hand was in his jacket pocket, not holding his wand exactly but close to it, because he had learned to trust the particular tension that lived between his shoulders when he walked into unknown magical spaces. But the tension didn't come. Instead there was something that he hadn't expected at all, a feeling like being recognized. Like the house was looking at him the way people look at someone they've been expecting for a long time. The front door opened before he touched it. Inside smelled of dust and stone and something else, parchment, maybe, or the particular wormwood smell of old furniture that's been waiting in the dark. The entrance hall was floored in dark slate and the ceiling was high, and along the walls were portraits, and the portraits were awake. They were all awake. Every single one. They'd clearly been asleep, or whatever the portrait equivalent was, for 15 years, and Harry's arrival had apparently served as an alarm clock, because faces were blinking and turning and leaning forward in their frames, and the noise was immediate and layered and slightly overwhelming. "James," said a woman's voice from halfway up the staircase. Her portrait showed her at about 40, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing robes from at least a century back. She was staring at Harry with an expression of fierce and fragile hope. "No," Harry said gently. "I'm his son. Harry." A moment of absolute silence from the portraits. Then several of them began talking at once, and Harry caught fragments. "James's boy, look at his eyes, Lily's eyes, look, but the hair is exactly 15 years, has it been 15 years, and under all of it, the woman on the staircase, who he thought might be his grandmother Euphemia, was simply looking at him with her hands pressed flat against the frame of her portrait as though she was trying to reach through it. "You look like your father," she said. "Except for the eyes." "Everyone says that," Harry said. Her mouth curved. "Your father said the same thing, every time someone pointed it out." She looked at him properly, cataloguing, assessing, and the sharpness in her eyes said she was not the kind of woman who found what she was looking for easily, and she knew it. "You've come to claim the seat." "Yes." "Then go to the study. End of the corridor, up the stairs, third door on the left. Your father's chair is there. Sit in it." She paused. "And come back after. I want to talk to you." Harry nodded. He looked at Ron and Hermione. "Wait here." "Absolutely not," Hermione said pleasantly. The study was a beautiful room even under 15 years of dust, bookshelves floor to ceiling, a desk in dark oak, a fireplace, and in the center of the room facing the window, a high-backed chair in aged green leather that looked like it had been made for exactly this purpose. Harry walked to it without hesitating and sat down. The moment he did, something passed through the room, not a sound or a light, but a sensation, a deep settling vibration like a bell struck at a frequency too low to hear but perfectly possible to feel. The dust on the bookshelves stirred. The cold fireplace lit with a quiet blue flame that then shifted to gold. On the desk, a document appeared, neat, formal, sealed with the Potter crest. Harry reached over and picked it up. It read, in a handwriting he'd seen on the back of a letter once and recognized immediately, "If you're reading this, something went wrong. But you're here, which means something also went right. The house is yours. Everything in it is yours. I hope you find it in better shape than I imagine you will." James. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it carefully, slipped it inside his jacket next to his own list, and stood up. "Right," he said to the room. "Next." Blackthorn Hold was in the Scottish Highlands, east of Inverness, and getting there involved a hired car, a ferry, a 2-mile walk along a coastal path with the wind coming in off the North Sea like a personal grievance, and Hermione explaining at length why the pre-ministry concept of lordship authority was legally fascinating while Ron ate sandwiches and Harry walked ahead listening to both of them simultaneously. It wasn't like Potter Manor. There was nothing warm about it. Blackthorn Hold sat on a rock shelf above the sea, and it had been built by people who thought comfort was a character failing. The stone was black, or close enough, dark granite, worn smooth by centuries of Atlantic weather, with narrow windows that looked like eyes half closed against the wind. The main tower rose from the center, and on either side the walls ran along the cliff edge with the confidence of something that had seen storms try and fail for 400 years. There was no illusion over this one. It was simply there, in the way that very old things simply exist without needing to explain themselves. The Blacks, Ron said, looking at it from the path, were a cheerful people. They really weren't, Hermione said. Harry walked up to the gate, iron, unadorned, set into the wall, and pressed his palm flat against it. "I am Harry James Potter Black," he said. "Lord of House Black. I acknowledge this estate as mine." Nothing rippled. Nothing shifted. The gate clicked open, simple as that, with the sound of a very old mechanism finding its purpose again. Inside the walls was a courtyard, and inside the courtyard were the remnants of a garden that hadn't tried to be romantic at all. It had been purposeful once, herbs and stone paths and a well in the center. The main door of the hold stood open. In the entrance hall of Blackthorn Hold, there was one portrait. It was large, filling most of one wall, and it showed a man in black family robes sitting in a chair that looked like a throne for someone who found thrones insufficiently severe. He had the Black family's sharp bone structure and pale coloring, and when he saw Harry he leaned forward and looked at him with an expression of exhaustive appraisal. "Phineas Nigellus Black," Hermione whispered, recognizing him. The portrait's eyes flicked to her, then back to Harry. "You're serious as godson," he said. "Not a question." "Yes. You have his grandfather Arcturus's forehead," Phineas Nigellus said, as though this was relevant information Harry ought to have. "And the Potter jawline, which is unfortunate." "Thanks," Harry said. "I understand you've claimed the lordship. Confirmed at Gringotts this morning. And serious?" The voice was controlled, but not entirely. "Being freed today. Gringotts validated the petition. He'll have the paperwork." Harry paused. "He'll know it's legitimate." Phineas Nigellus Black was quiet for a moment. In the portrait, his hands tightened on the arms of the chair just slightly. "He was falsely imprisoned," he said. The words sounded like they cost something to say, for a man who had not had a reputation for charity. "I attempted to," he stopped. "There was nothing I could do, from inside a portrait." "I know," Harry said. Something shifted in the portrait's expression. Not warmth, exactly, the man clearly didn't have a great deal of use for warmth, but something adjacent to respect, which from Phineas Nigellus Black probably amounted to the same thing. "The claiming room is through there," he said, and gestured with one hand. "The chair is the original. Don't break it." "I'll do my best," Harry said. The chair in the Blackthorn Hold claiming room was carved from the same dark granite as the walls, which seemed deeply uncomfortable but turned out to have a worn smooth quality to it that spoke to several centuries of use. Harry sat in it and felt the same deep settling vibration as before, and the narrow windows of the hold let in the grey Highland light, and outside the wind moved across the stone like a hand across a drum. When he came back out, Phineas Nigellus was still watching from his portrait. "One thing," the portrait said. "The Black Family Library. Second floor, eastern wing. Sirius's father had certain items sealed. You'll want them. Particularly the ward-breaking manual and the political correspondence file from 1907. Don't ask me why yet. You'll understand when you read them." "Thank you," Harry said. Phineas Nigellus sniffed, which was apparently as close to "you're welcome" as he was going to get. Ron, who had been looking around the entrance hall with the expression of someone reading a difficult text in a second language, said quietly to Harry as they left, "The Black family is a lot." "I'm beginning to understand that," Harry said. Serpent's Rest was not on any map. This was, according to the Gringotts navigation documents, because Salazar Slytherin had specifically removed it from all cartographic records in 1010 AD, a date which made Hermione make a sound under her breath that was the academic equivalent of "Good Lord." It was located in the Somerset Levels, in the flat marshland south of Glastonbury, and the way to find it was not coordinates but a set of instructions written in a form of Old English that Harry could half read, supplemented by a translated note from Gringotts that said, essentially, "Follow the water until the water stops." They took a car as far as the road went and then walked along the edge of the marshes, with the sky very wide overhead and the reeds making a dry sound in the wind and the evening coming in slow across the flat land from the west. The light at this time of day in the Somerset Levels had a quality that Harry found impossible to describe and didn't try to. It was the color of old gold, and it lay across everything with the particular patience of light that had been landing on the same water for a very long time. "The water stops here," Hermione said suddenly, and she was right. The stream they'd been following simply stopped. Not a dam or a blockage, just a clean end, the water running up to a certain point and no further, as though it had agreed to a boundary. Beyond it, the air shimmered. Not like Potter Manor, something more deliberate than that. A warning. Harry stepped past the water's edge. The shimmer closed around him like stepping through a curtain, and the world on the other side was the same marshland and the same fading sky, except that there was a building that had absolutely no business existing in the Somerset Levels in the 6th century, let alone the present day. It was built low to the ground, in dark stone, and it was long rather than tall, serpentine, almost, the way it curved and bent with the land rather than imposing a shape on it. The roof was flat and covered in something green that wasn't quite moss. The entrance had no door, just a deep arch, and carved above the arch, deep, sure strokes that had not faded, was the Slytherin crest in its original form, before it became a school crest. Just a serpent, fully extended, in the act of speaking. Ron had gone very quiet. Not the calculating quiet, the other kind. "You all right?" Harry asked. "It's brilliant," Ron said, but his voice was careful. "And also a bit terrifying." "Yeah," Harry agreed. Hermione was looking at the carvings with an expression that would have alarmed her professors. "These are Old English runes mixed with Proto-Parseltongue notation," she said. "Harry. This predates, this is one of the oldest magical structures in Britain. This might be the oldest surviving structure." "It's mine," Harry said, and the word still felt strange in his mouth, not mine like a possession, but mine like a responsibility. He walked through the arch. Inside was a single great hall, long and low-ceilinged, lit by some sourceless ambient glow that came from the stone itself, faint, greenish, not enough to read by but enough to navigate. Along the walls were shelves, and on the shelves were objects that Harry did not touch because the Gringotts documents had been clear that the Slytherin Vault's artifacts required Lord acknowledgement before handling. In the center of the hall, on a raised dais, was a chair. This one was not carved from stone or leather. It was made from a single piece of wood so dark it was nearly black, the grain visible under some treatment that had preserved it for 1,000 years, and its arms were carved into serpent heads that curved outward at the ends, mouth slightly open, not threatening but attentive. Harry walked to it and sat down. And the room came alive. Not the subtle settling vibration of the other two, this was something else, something considerably more awake. The glow in the walls brightened. The shelves lit up one by one. And from the walls, voices, not portraits, there were no portraits, but voices built into the stone itself, the accumulated residue of magic so old and so carefully layered that it had become a kind of presence. Air. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, and it was not quite a voice, it was more like the word taking shape in the air directly inside Harry's head. "We have been waiting." "I know," Harry said. "The blood confirms. The heir of Salazar speaks the old tongue and carries the inheritance intact." "What do you claim?" Harry thought about this for a moment. What did he claim? The gold, the legal authority, the political weight, yes. But this place felt like it was asking something different. This place had been sealed for 400 years, waiting for someone who wasn't Tom Riddle, who had come to take rather than inherit, who had wanted the power without the weight of what came with it. "Everything," Harry said. "The knowledge and the responsibility both. I claim it completely." The room settled. It was the only way to describe it, the brightness leveled out, the voices in the stone went quiet, and everything that had been tense and held in waiting relaxed into something that felt very much like relief. Then, on the dais, beside the chair, a book appeared. Old, ancient, the cover unmarked, the pages dense with handwriting that Harry could tell from 3 feet away was not going to be easy reading. He picked it up. The first page said, in clear, deliberate script, "If you are not the heir, you are already dead. If you are reading this, you are not dead. Read carefully." "Cheerful," said Ron from the archway, where he and Hermione had been watching. "He built the Slytherin dungeon common room," Harry said. "This is consistent." But he was smiling slightly as he said it, and he put the book carefully in his bag. They reached Godric's Hollow after dark. Harry had been here before, but the last time had been in winter, and everything about it was different in July, the stone of the church warm in the evening light instead of cold and grey, the trees full, the village square busy with the end of a summer day. Families going in and out of the pub. Someone's dog investigating the war memorial. The particular quietness of a place that has lived for a long time and knows it. The cottage was on the edge of the village, past the churchyard, and Harry walked through the gate in the low stone wall and stopped. He'd expected ruins. The Gringotts documents had mentioned restoration requirements, and the last time he'd stood here, that cold December, with Hermione beside him and the snow on the graves, there had been a crumbled wall and the ghost of a house. But the documents had also mentioned something he hadn't fully processed until now, that a lord's approach to an ancestral seat began the restoration. The magic in the property responds to the bloodline before the formal claiming, beginning the process of returning the structure to its proper state. The cottage was not ruins. It was, in the process of not being ruins. The walls were solid but the roof was half restored, the new thatch blending into the old with a precision that spoke of magic rather than craftsmanship. The garden was clearing itself, the years of overgrowth retreating toward the walls in a slow tide. The windows were intact. Harry stood at the garden gate for a long moment. Hermione put her hand on his arm, briefly, and didn't say anything. He walked up the path and put his hand on the door and said, "I am Harry James Potter. I am Lord of House Potter. I am Lord of House Peverell. I come home." The door opened. The cottage was small inside, much smaller than it appeared in his imagination, where it had always loomed large with the weight of what happened there. A sitting room, a kitchen, a staircase. Simple, lived-in furniture that had been preserved by the same magic that preserved the portraits. A child's drawing pinned to the wall in the kitchen, abstract shapes in crayon, one large shape and two smaller ones, the kind of drawing that's labeled Mummy Daddy Me in uncertain letters. Harry looked at the drawing for a while. Then he went upstairs. The room at the top of the stairs had a small bed with a mobile above it, stars and moons in silver and gold, charmed to move, still moving after 15 years because the magic in them was good and simple and had no reason to stop. Harry stood in the doorway of his childhood bedroom, the one he'd been in for 15 months and couldn't remember, the last safe place before the world broke, and felt the weight of all four lordships settle into him properly for the first time. Not as power, exactly. As responsibility. As the difference between having a thing and being responsible for what you do with it. He sat down on the edge of the small bed and the mobile turned above him, and outside the window the last light of the July evening was going gold and then orange and then the soft purple that comes before dark. Ron appeared in the doorway, looked at him, looked at the mobile, and sat down on the floor without being asked and without saying anything. Hermione appeared a moment later, read the room, and sat beside Ron. They were quiet for a while. Outside a bird was singing the end of the day, and somewhere in the village someone was laughing, and the cottage was very still around them, the particular stillness of a place that has been holding something in for a very long time and has just, finally, let it go. "We need to free Sirius," Harry said eventually. "Tonight?" Ron asked. "Tomorrow morning. Early." Harry looked at the mobile. "He needs to know before the Ministry does. If they find out about the petition through official channels before I've told him, he'll have gotten the documents from Gringotts by now," Hermione said. "Ragnarok said they'd deliver them simultaneously with filing." "I know. But I want to see him." Harry paused. "I need to tell him in person." Neither of them argued with that. "Hermione," Harry said. "While I was doing the claiming, what were you thinking?" A beat. She knew what he was really asking. "I was thinking," she said carefully, "that the founding charter argument is legally airtight. But legally airtight and politically survivable are two very different things. The moment you file the notice of dissolution, I know. The Ministry will declare you a criminal. Fudge, or whoever's in charge at that point, Scrimgeour," Ron said. "Dad thinks Scrimgeour will have replaced Fudge by September." "Scrimgeour, then. He'll move to arrest you." "The Aurors can't arrest a lord of a founding house without Wizengamot sanction," Harry said. "Which requires a majority vote. And I hold 3 founding votes with veto authority. They might try anyway." "They can try." Harry said it without bravado, just a flat, calm statement of fact. The Slytherin Lordship specifically exists outside Ministry authority. An Auror who arrests a Slytherin Lord is, technically, acting in direct violation of the founding charter, which means their arrest is legally void and they're personally liable for criminal trespass. Ron made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "You spent 6 hours on a bus last night reading founding documents." "I did. That might be the most Hermione thing anyone has ever done." "Thank you," Hermione said. "It wasn't a compliment." "I know. I'm reclaiming it." Harry almost smiled. He looked at the mobile above him, the silver stars, the gold moons, still moving with the patient magic of someone who had hung them there for a child to watch and had made them good enough to last. "There's something else," he said. "In the Slytherin Vault documents, the sealed ones, the ones only I can access. There's a list of Slytherin's correspondence. Letters to and from the other founders. And in one of them," he paused. He'd read this on the bus too, and it had knocked him sideways in a way the legal documents hadn't. Slytherin wrote to Godric Gryffindor, about 6 months before he left Hogwarts. He said, Harry reached into his jacket and pulled out a copied note, the Gringotts archivist having transcribed it with the translated text below. He read it, "The school must outlast us both. Make sure the castle remembers what it's for, not glory, not lineage, but children. Make sure it remembers the children." The room was very quiet. "They argue about that," Hermione said softly. "In all the history books. Why Slytherin left. Whether it was purely about blood purity or whether there was something else. There was something else, Harry said. He put the note away. He didn't leave because he hated Muggle-born students. He left because he thought the school was becoming about power instead of about learning. He was wrong about the solution, catastrophically wrong. The blood purity stuff was always going to end badly, but he wasn't wrong about the problem. Tom Riddle took the lordship, Ron said slowly, and used that argument to justify everything. Yes, Harry said. Which is what happens when someone inherits power without inheriting the responsibility that was supposed to come with it. He looked at the mobile again. I'm not doing that. They were quiet for a moment. I want to fix the school too, Harry said. Not just the ministry. The school has been running on the same structure since 1700 and it's a mess, Ron said. Yeah. We know. We go there. I know. But that's later. Harry stood up. First things first. He looked around the small room, the crib, the mobile, the walls with their faded paint. Tomorrow we free Sirius. Then we go back to London, and we file the notice of dissolution, and everything goes sideways. Will you be ready? Hermione asked. Harry looked at her. I've been getting ready my whole life, he said. I just didn't know what for. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky over the Somerset marshes, and the village was settling into its evening routines, and the cottage at the edge of the churchyard stood warm and restored and occupied for the first time in 15 years, doing what houses do when someone finally comes back to them. It waited, patient as stone, for what came next. Harry slept in his old room that night, in the small bed under the moving mobile, and he slept well, which surprised him. He woke before dawn, made tea in the kitchen, and stood at the window looking out at the grey pre-morning light over the graves, and thought about his parents, and thought about Sirius, and thought about the notice of dissolution that was sitting in his bag ready to be filed, and felt, not afraid. Not nervous. Something else. The feeling of a thing that has been compressed for a very long time beginning, finally, to expand. He wrote a letter. Not to Dumbledore, not to the ministry. To Neville Longbottom. Neville. I need to tell you something about House Longbottom that you might not know. You have a standing in the Wisengamot that predates the ministry. I'll explain in person. Can we meet at Diagon Alley in 3 days? Bring your Gran if she'll come. Harry he sent it with Hedwig, who had found him at Godric's Hollow without being told where he was going and was showing no signs of thinking this was unusual. Harry watched her vanish into the pre-dawn sky. Then he poured a second cup of tea and started preparing for the day. The 4 seats were claimed. The legal groundwork was laid. Sirius was next. And after Sirius, the ministry. Chapter 3, The Notice of Dissolution. Sirius Black was sitting at the kitchen table at Grimmauld Place when Harry walked in, and the first thing Harry noticed was that he looked like a man who had just received news that he'd half convinced himself wasn't real. The Gringotts letter was open on the table in front of him. He'd read it enough times that the parchment had acquired a soft quality at the folds, the quality of something handled repeatedly, the way people handle things they keep picking up because they can't quite believe what's written on them. Sirius looked up when Harry came through the kitchen door, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Sirius's eyes, grey, sharp, the Black family eyes, moved from Harry's face to the documents Harry was carrying and then back to his face. You actually did it, Sirius said. I actually did it. Sirius looked back down at the Gringotts letter. Then up at Harry again. Then he pushed back from the table, crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, and pulled Harry into a hug that was sudden and very firm and lasted for a while. Harry hugged him back without any of the awkwardness he might have felt a year ago, because there was nothing awkward about it. Sirius was shaking slightly, the controlled, suppressed shaking of someone who has been holding something tightly for a very long time and has just been told they can put it down. 12 years, Sirius said into Harry's shoulder. I know. I told myself, when Dumbledore said wait, I told myself it was strategy. He pulled back, held Harry at arm's length. Did you know he had the documents? Dumbledore. The family charter documents. He had them in his office, Harry. I found out from Phineas Nigellus, of all people, Portrait told me last year, said Dumbledore had been holding them since before Azkaban, Harry said. Sirius went very still. What? The Gringotts archivists found a request for family charter documents filed under Dumbledore's name. Predating your imprisonment by 2 years. Harry held his gaze. He knew about the wrongful imprisonment provision. He's known the whole time. The silence in the kitchen was a different quality from the one before. Sirius sat back down, slowly. He picked up the letter and set it down again. His jaw had tightened in a way that Harry recognized as the Black family version of someone counting very carefully to 10. Why, Sirius said, and his voice was almost conversational, which was how Harry knew it wasn't. I think, Harry said, sitting down across from him, because a free Sirius complicated his plans for me. A free Sirius means I had a legal guardian who wasn't Dumbledore's choice. It means I had someone with political authority, Lord of House Black, standing between me and the decisions being made on my behalf. He paused. I think Dumbledore genuinely believes he's protecting me. I think he genuinely believes everything he does is the right thing. That's almost the most dangerous part of it. Sirius stared at the table for a long moment. Then he looked up, and whatever he was feeling had been compressed back into something manageable, the way the Black family apparently did things, though on Sirius's face there was always more leakage than the portrait of Phineas Nigellus would have found acceptable. So what now? Harry put the documents on the table. You're free. Completely and legally, the petition is filed, the Gringotts validation supersedes any ministry warrant, and as Lord of House Black I've issued a formal declaration that you were wrongfully imprisoned under the family charter. The ministry has 48 hours to formally acknowledge your status or be in violation of 3 separate pre-existing legal frameworks simultaneously. They won't acknowledge it quietly. No. They'll make noise. Harry leaned forward. Let them. By the time they've finished making noise, we'll have filed the notice. Sirius picked up the second document Harry had placed on the table, not the Freedom Petition, the other one. He read it in silence. As he read, his expression went through several interesting phases, arriving finally at something that looked remarkably like delight, which was an expression Harry had seen on Sirius's face before but never quite like this, not the slightly reckless delight of someone enjoying chaos, but the deeper, warmer delight of someone watching justice move. You're going to serve them a notice of legal dissolution, Sirius said. Under the founding charter, citing Articles 7, 12, and 19, and appending the Slytherin exclusion clause and the Peverell precedent. Harry had memorized the structure. The ministry was created by the Wisengamot. The Wisengamot was created by the ancient houses. The ancient houses never ceded supreme authority, they delegated administrative function, which is not the same thing. The ministry has been operating outside its legitimate mandate for 200 years. Dumbledore doesn't have a vote, Harry said. He has an appointed position. Appointments can be terminated by the governing body. He met Sirius's eyes. I'm calling the governing body. Sirius was quiet for a long moment. Outside the kitchen window, Grimmauld Place was doing its usual thing of being unwelcoming, the grey London morning pressing against the glass with the determination of weather that has given up trying to be pleasant. I want in, Sirius said. You're already in. You're Lord of House Black, the actual Lord now, not the claimed in exile one. Your seat on the Wisengamot is valid. I meant, Sirius gestured, a wide, expansive gesture that encompassed the documents and the table and the kitchen and apparently the whole project. All of it. I want to be part of all of it. I know, Harry said. That's why I came here first. Sirius looked at him for a moment. Something in his face shifted, grief and relief arriving at the same time and doing what 2 large things do when they arrive in the same place simultaneously. James would have, he stopped. Started again. He would have thought this was mental. Almost certainly, Harry agreed. He also would have been so proud his head would have fallen off. That's, Harry said, and then stopped, because there was something stuck in his throat for a moment and he needed a second. That's good to hear. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, London went about its business in the grey morning. A cat walked across the windowsill of the house opposite and regarded Grimmauld Place with the supreme indifference of a creature that has made peace with the world being strange. "When are you serving the notice?" Sirius asked. "Today," Harry said. "This morning?" Sirius blinked. "Today. The longer I wait, the more time people have to prepare obstacles. I want this filed and served before anyone outside this room has processed the fact that I've claimed 4 lordships and freed you." Sirius stood up abruptly, picked up his teacup, drained it, set it down, and ran a hand through his hair, which was longer and cleaner than it had been at the end of 4th year but still had the quality of belonging to someone who found grooming aspirational rather than essential. "Right," he said. "Let me get my robes." They went to the Ministry of Magic at 9 in the morning. All 5 of them, Harry, Sirius, Hermione, Ron, Anne, because Harry had sent a Patronus the night before and Neville had turned up at Godric's Hollow at 6 in the morning in travelling robes with his grandmother Augusta behind him, which Harry had not quite expected but which had turned out to be enormously useful, Neville Longbottom. The conversation with Neville and Augusta had lasted about 40 minutes and covered the Longbottom family standing as a non-founding but ancient noble house with a valid Wisengamot seat that had been effectively disenfranchised by a series of procedural maneuvers between 1820 and 1840. Augusta had listened to Harry's explanation with the expression of someone who has suspected this for years and is finally watching the paperwork catch up with her suspicions. At the end of it, she had said, very precisely, "What do you need from us?" "Your proxy vote for the Wisengamot convening," Harry had said. "And your presence today." Augusta had considered this for approximately 4 seconds. "Done," she'd said, with the tone of someone signing a contract they've been waiting to sign for a long time. So they went to the ministry at 9 in the morning, through the telephone box entrance in their various robes, and they walked through the atrium, and Harry wore the full formal robes that the Potter vault had contained, midnight blue with the Potter crest at the collar, not ostentatious but unmistakably significant, and Sirius wore black family dress robes for the first time in 12 years, which fit him perfectly because the robes had been charmed to size and also because Sirius moved like someone for whom formal robes were a native environment regardless of how long he'd been away from them. The atrium did the thing that large public spaces do when something unusual walks into them, it went slightly quieter. Not silent, people kept moving, the golden fountain kept doing its thing in the middle, the fireplaces kept flashing with incoming arrivals, but the quality of the ambient noise shifted, became more aware of itself. Harry didn't slow down. He walked at a steady pace toward the security desk, and the security wizard, a bored-looking man named Eric who was usually far more interested in his crossword than his job, looked up, looked at Harry, looked at Sirius, and went quite still. "Harry Potter," said Eric carefully. "And, Sirius Black," said Sirius. "Free citizen. You'll have confirmation in your system by now." Gringotts filed the validation at 7 this morning. Eric looked at his system, looked at them, looked at his system again. Yes, the system shows." He seemed to be having difficulty processing multiple simultaneous unusual facts. "You're here to file a legal notice with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement," Harry said. "Through the official channel, as required by Founding Charter Article 14. He smiled at Eric pleasantly. "We know the way." They walked past the desk. Behind them, Harry heard Eric reach for his communication mirror, and that was fine, in fact, it was necessary. By the time they reached the DMLE filing office, Harry estimated they had about 4 minutes before someone senior arrived to make things interesting. The filing office was on the 3rd floor, and it was staffed by a harried-looking witch named Miriam who was clearly in the middle of a morning that had not yet become interesting and was about to change character entirely. She looked up when 5 people walked in wearing formal robes, and something in her professional processing engine recognized that this was not a standard filing. "We're here to file a notice of legal action under the founding charter," Hermione said, and she placed the prepared documents on the counter with the precision of someone who has organized every piece of paperwork they have ever touched in their entire life. 7 copies, as required. I've included the Gringotts validation stamps, the blood right confirmation, the lordship certificates, and the charter citations. Miriam looked at the documents. She picked up the first page. She read the title. Notice of Legal Dissolution and Mandate Review, issued under the authority of the ancient and noble houses of Potter, Black, Slytherin, and Peverell, pursuant to Founding Charter Articles 7, 12, and 19, this says you're. She looked up. "You're dissolving the ministry." "We're restoring the Wisengamot to its founding authority," Harry said. "The ministry will continue to function in its administrative capacity during the review period. No one loses their job tomorrow. The dissolution applies to the ministry's claimed governing authority only, not to its operational departments." Miriam looked at the documents again. She had the expression of someone who has been trained for unusual filings but has just encountered something for which training was insufficient preparation. "I'm required to stamp and accept any filing that meets the formal requirements," she said, slowly. "The formal requirements are met," Hermione said. "If you need to verify, pages 4 through 9 contain the complete charter citations with Gringotts archival references." Miriam read pages 4 through 9. It took a while. Harry waited. Sirius examined the wall art, which was a series of ministry-approved paintings of witches and wizards doing administrative things with an enthusiasm that suggested the artist had never met any actual administrative workers. "This is valid," Miriam said, with the tone of someone who had deeply hoped it wouldn't be. "We know," said Harry. Miriam stamped the documents. "All 7 copies." Her hand was steady, which Harry respected. She handed the top copy back to Harry and kept the rest for filing, and the moment the last stamp came down something shifted in the air, a subtle, deep shift that Harry thought was probably just his imagination until he saw Sirius's head come up like a dog catching a scent, and Hermione's hand go to her wand, and Augusta Longbottom stand just slightly straighter beside her grandson. Not imagination, then. Old magic. The founding charter recognizing itself being invoked. "Thank you," Harry said to Miriam. "You've been very professional." They walked out of the filing office. Harry had the copy folded under his arm and his wand in his robe pocket and felt completely calm, which he recognized as the feeling of something having been set irrevocably in motion. Not recklessness, something much more deliberate than that. The feeling of a decision that has already been made and is simply now being acted upon. They were in the lift when Cornelius Fudge arrived. The lift doors opened on the 2nd floor, and Fudge was standing there with 2 oars, and he had the expression of a man who had received very rapid news through very rapid channels and had run all the way here and was still slightly out of breath. He was in full minister regalia, the lime green bowler hat, the matching robes, which was either coincidence or someone had told him to make a statement. He stared at Harry. Then at Sirius. Then at the group of them collectively. "Potter," he said. "Minister," said Harry. "Sirius Black is, a free citizen," Sirius said pleasantly. "Documented, validated, and legally confirmed. Hello, Cornelius. You look well. Incarceration suits me less than it does you, I think." Fudge's eyes moved to the documents under Harry's arm. "What have you filed?" "A legal notice," Harry said. "Copies have been submitted through proper channels. You'll receive yours shortly. Miriam has your department's copy." He stepped out of the lift because it was his floor and because standing in a lift having a confrontation struck him as unnecessarily awkward. The others followed. "The notice will be formally delivered to the minister's office within the hour, as required by Article 14. Fudge stepped back, which put him in the corridor. His face had gone through several colors, arriving at a kind of mottled purple that reminded Harry unpleasantly of his uncle. "You can't just, the ministry is the governing authority of, with respect, minister," Harry said, that's precisely what's in question. He met Fudge's eyes directly. Not aggressively, not with heat, just clearly, in the way that you look at someone when you want to make sure they understand that you mean what you're saying. The founding charter establishes the Wisengamot as the supreme governing body and the ministry as its administrative arm. I've filed a notice calling for a review of how that division has been managed over the last 200 years. It's a legal process, not a coup. Fudge stared at him. Dumbledore doesn't have a vote, Harry said. I do. 3, actually. The two Aurors with Fudge were looking at each other with the expression of people who are trying to calculate whether this situation is one they've been trained for. One of them, a senior Auror whose name Harry thought was Dawlish, had his hand near his wand. Auror Dawlish, said Sirius, and his voice had a quality to it that was interesting, not threatening, but carrying the particular weight of someone who was raised to understand exactly what his name meant in certain rooms. I'd think very carefully about what you're considering. Mr. Black, Dawlish started. Lord Black, said Augusta Longbottom, and her voice cut across the corridor like a blade, clean and precise. Lord Potter-Black-Slytherin-Peverell is a member of 4 ancient houses, 3 of them founding. The Slytherin Lordship exists outside ministry jurisdiction by specific founding charter exclusion, which means that any ministry official who attempts to arrest, detain, or obstruct him is acting without legal authority and is personally criminally liable. She adjusted her feathered hat with the air of someone who has been waiting for this particular moment for some time. Is that clear, Auror? Dawlish looked at Augusta Longbottom. Then at Harry. Then at Sirius. Then at the corridor, which was no longer just the 5 of them. Ministry workers had stopped at a safe distance, watching with the particular expression of people who are witnessing history and are not sure whether to be excited or alarmed. Dawlish stepped back. Fudge looked at Harry with something that had moved past purple into something new, something complicated, the expression of a man watching the floor shift under his feet and not knowing how to fall. You think you can just tear down everything? I think the ministry should be what it was designed to be, Harry said. Which is efficient and honest and accountable to the people it serves. If it's already those things, the review will confirm it and we'll all go home. He paused. If it isn't, he shrugged slightly, then something better needs to exist. He walked away. The others came with him. Behind them, Fudge was talking, rapidly, low, something about emergency session and Dumbledore and containment, and Harry heard all of it and filed it under expected and kept walking. They were through the atrium and back at the telephone box before anyone spoke. That, said Ron, was the most satisfying thing I've ever been present for. It's not done, Harry said. I know. But still. Ron grinned. Dawlish's face. Dawlish's face, Sirius agreed, with feeling. Hermione was already making notes. She was holding a pad of parchment and writing on it while walking, which was a talent Harry had quietly admired since 3rd year. The ministry will convene an emergency Wisengamot session to challenge the notice, she said. They'll argue procedural grounds, that the founding charter articles aren't applicable under current law, that they were superseded by the 1707 amendment. Which is why we need the ancient Wisengamot convened first, Harry said. Before they can hold their session, we hold ours. Can you actually do that? Neville asked. He'd been quiet through the ministry confrontation, watchful, absorbing, but his eyes were sharp and he'd missed nothing. Harry had noticed that about Neville this year. He looked soft around the edges but he wasn't, not at the center. The founding charter grants any founding lord the right to convene an independent session of the ancient Wisengamot within 72 hours of filing a charter notice, Hermione said, not looking up from her notes. It requires a minimum quorum of 5 voting members. Harry has 4 votes. We need 1 more legitimate seat. House Longbottom, Harry said, and looked at Augusta. She looked back at him steadily. My grandson's seat, she said, has been contested by the ministry since 1841 on procedural grounds that we were never able to properly challenge. Your notice creates a window to challenge it. If we file a parallel seat validation, Gringotts will validate it, Harry said. I've already spoken to Ragnarok about the Longbottom seat. The contested grounds are procedural, not legal. A counterfiling clears them automatically under charter law. Augusta was quiet for a moment. She looked at Neville. Neville looked back at her, and something passed between them, grandmother and grandson, the accumulated weight of everything the Longbottoms had lost and everything they'd managed to hold on to, and Neville nodded. "File it," Augusta said. They stepped into the telephone box 5 at a time, and the London morning came in through the gaps, exhaust and summer and the distant sound of traffic, and Harry thought about the copy of the notice in his hand, about Fudge's face, about the old magic that had moved in the DMLE filing office when the stamp came down. He thought about Voldemort, somewhere out there, building his army and wondering why his opponent had stopped being predictable. He thought about Dumbledore, who would know by now, who would be writing a letter or planning a visit or both, who would have a great many measured and reasonable things to say about patience and timing and the bigger picture. He thought he'd let Dumbledore have his say. He owed him that much. The man wasn't his enemy, only his obstacle, which was a different thing, and an obstacle you could reason with or route around. He pressed the dial on the telephone box. "Harry," Hermione said, as they descended. "Yeah. What do we do about Voldemort?" "I know," Harry said. "I haven't forgotten." He looked at the notice in his hand. But Voldemort's strategy has always depended on the Ministry being the only alternative to him. The Ministry says be afraid. Voldemort says be afraid of the Ministry. Both options lead to fear, and fear leads to surrender. He folded the notice and put it in his pocket. "If there's no Ministry to be afraid of, then there's no binary," Hermione said. "Then there's no binary," Harry agreed. "He loses half his leverage just from this." The lift opened into the atrium. Around them, Ministry workers went about their morning, some of them glancing over, none of them yet sure enough of what they'd heard to react to it. The golden fountain stood in the center, the witch and wizard and centaur and goblin and house elf in their arranged poses, and Harry looked at it as he passed. Someone would need to redesign that fountain. Those were not the right proportions for those figures. But that could wait. Everything had its order. Dolores Umbridge found out about the notice at 11:30. Harry knew this because at 11:30, a memo arrived at Grimmauld Place. They'd gone back to prepare for the Wisengamot convening, folded into the shape of a moth and addressed in a handwriting that was pink at the edges. It landed on the kitchen table and opened itself, and the message was brief: "Lord Potter-Black-Slytherin-Peverell. I suggest you reconsider your reckless actions before you find yourself facing consequences that no amount of inherited privilege will protect you from. The Ministry has measures available that supersede ancient charter provisions, and I would hate for a young man with such promise to discover them the hard way. Senior Undersecretary Dolores J. Umbridge." Harry read it. Sirius read it over his shoulder. Hermione read it after Sirius. Ron read it last and then set it back on the table with the careful precision of someone not allowing themselves to crumple it. "She's threatening you," Ron said. "She is," Harry said. "What measures?" Hermione said. "What measures that supersede charter provisions?" "There aren't," she stopped. "She might be bluffing." "She might," Harry said. He picked up the memo, folded it, and put it in a drawer. "Or she might have found something. She's been in the Ministry for 30 years and she's careful and she's clever in a specific kind of way." He looked at the drawer. "She's the one I need to be most careful about." "Not Fudge?" Sirius asked. "Fudge is scared. Scared people are predictable. Umbridge isn't scared." Harry met Sirius's eyes. "She's angry. And she thinks she's right. People who are angry and think they're right are genuinely dangerous because they don't have the limitations that cruelty for its own sake has. She's not cruel because she enjoys it, she's cruel because she believes it's necessary, and that means she won't stop when it stops being fun." The kitchen was quiet. "She sounds like the worst kind of teacher," Neville said from the corner, and there was something in his voice, quiet and flat and very certain, that made everyone look at him. She is, Harry said. And she's going to try something before the Wisengamot convening. He looked at Hermione. I need everything locked down. The legal filings need secondary witnesses outside the ministry system. Gringotts has copies, but I also want the documents with Madame Bones at the DMLE. She can't be bought and she won't be bullied. Amelia Bones, Hermione said. She's the head of the DMLE. She's the best person in the ministry, Harry said. Which makes her the hardest person to deal with. She's going to oppose this on principle because she believes the institution can be fixed from the inside, and she's not entirely wrong. But she's going to have to choose a side. Can we bring her to ours? Sirius asked. We don't need her on our side, Harry said. We just need her to not be on Umbridge's side. Those are different things. He stood up and went to the window. Outside, Grimmauld Place was grey and still and thoroughly miserable looking, as it always was, and Harry thought about the 72 hours he had before the ancient Wisengamot had to convene, and about Umbridge's letter sitting in the drawer, and about all the things he hadn't yet done that needed doing. I need to go to Hogwarts, he said. What? Ron sat up. Now. Not the school, Dumbledore. I said I'd let him have his say. He needs to have it before the convening, not at it. Harry turned from the window. Because if he shows up at the ancient Wisengamot as an opponent, it will be complicated. But if I go to him first, he'll try to talk you out of it, Hermione said. He can try, Harry said. And maybe he'll have something worth hearing. He usually does, buried underneath everything else. He picked up his jacket. But he needs to know that this is happening regardless. I'm not asking permission. You're informing him, Sirius said. I'm showing him the respect of not letting him be blindsided, Harry said. That's different from asking permission. He's never shown me the same courtesy, but I'm not doing this his way. Sirius looked at him for a moment, something searching in it, something that was trying to find James Potter in the person standing across the kitchen and finding someone else instead. Someone he was still learning. You've thought about this a lot. I've thought about everything a lot, Harry said. I had a very productive 12 hours on a bus. He paused at the door. Sirius. While I'm gone, the Black Family Library. The 1907 political correspondence file that Phineas Nigellus mentioned. Can you get it? Already sent Creature for it, Sirius said. Should be here by this afternoon. Harry nodded. Good. He looked at all of them, Ron with his sandwich and his steady, calculating eyes, Hermione with her notes and her impossible competence, Neville sitting quietly in the corner, carrying something large without making a fuss about it, Augusta standing straight-backed by the fireplace with her hat at a slightly dangerous angle, Sirius, finally free, finally home, finally allowed to be what he was. This works, he said. What we're doing. It works because it's right, not just legal. Keep that in front of you. He went to Hogwarts. Dumbledore was in his office when Harry arrived, which was not surprising. What was surprising was that he didn't seem surprised to see Harry. He was sitting behind his desk, and the portraits around the walls were awake and watching, and Fawkes on his perch gave Harry a look of benign assessment, and Dumbledore's hands were folded on the desk with the careful patience of a man who has been sitting very still for some time. Harry, he said. Sit down. I'll stand, thanks, Harry said. Not rudely, just honestly. He stood in front of the desk and looked at the old man across it, and thought about the documents he'd found, and about Sirius in Azkaban for 12 years, and about all the things he'd been told to wait for, and he felt something that was not quite anger but was adjacent to it, sitting in his chest with a quiet and permanent quality. You've been busy, Dumbledore said. I have. The Gringotts confirmation. The property claims. Sirius. He paused. The notice. All of it, yes. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. His blue eyes were very clear and very tired. May I tell you what I think you're risking? Please, Harry said. You are risking a fracture in British wizarding society at a time when unity is essential, Dumbledore said. You are risking alienating institutional support at a time when Voldemort is actively recruiting. You are risking creating a power vacuum that his forces will attempt to fill. And you are doing all of this at 16, with extraordinary courage and extraordinary intelligence and, he paused, without the full picture. What picture am I missing? Dumbledore looked at him. And Harry looked back, and waited, and didn't fill the silence, because he'd learned that Dumbledore's silences were where the real information sometimes lived. Voldemort knows about the Lordships, Dumbledore said. Not the full scope of them, he abandoned his claim, so the Slytherin confirmation would have been hidden from him. But he knows about the Potter and Black claims. He has known for some time. And his response to your consolidation of power has been, Dumbledore paused. Unexpected. How unexpected? He has not moved to destroy you. He has moved to understand you. Dumbledore leaned forward slightly. That is more dangerous, in some ways. Harry absorbed this. He's trying to figure out if I'm a threat to his plan or a tool for it. Yes. And a lord of 4 ancient houses, holding the legal authority to dissolve the governing structure, that could be either, depending on how it's wielded. I'm not interested in being a tool for anyone, Harry said. Including you. The office was very quiet. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and in the look was something complex, regret and pride and something that looked, uncomfortably, like guilt. No, he said softly. I don't suppose you are. You had the Black family charter documents, Harry said. Before Sirius went to Azkaban. Dumbledore was very still. You knew he could have been freed on wrongful imprisonment grounds. You chose not to use them. Harry held the old man's gaze. I'm not here to confront you about it. I'm here to tell you that I know, and that I understand you thought you were protecting something, and that I'm telling you as clearly as I can that I am done being protected in ways I haven't consented to. A long silence. I made a mistake, Dumbledore said quietly. And the remarkable thing about it was that he seemed to mean it completely. Several mistakes. I genuinely believed, that control of the variables was protection. I understand now that it was not. He met Harry's eyes. That doesn't absolve me. No, Harry said. It doesn't. Another silence, different in quality. Will you support the Wizengamot convening? Harry asked. I cannot stop it, Dumbledore said. That's not what I asked. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I will not oppose it. Whether I support it, he paused. Give me until the convening to consider the full shape of what you're building. That's fair, Harry said. He left Dumbledore's office, and walked back through the empty summer castle, the suits of armor and the moving staircases and the portraits watching him pass, and thought about Dumbledore's eyes, and about the word mistake said with the weight of genuine acknowledgement, and about the fact that the most complicated people to deal with were not the evil ones but the good ones who had made significant errors and had to carry both things at once. He stepped out into the summer grounds, and the Hogwarts grounds were green and wide and very beautiful in the afternoon light, and somewhere under his feet the roots of the castle went down into foundations that predated everyone alive. Harry stood for a moment, feeling the ground. Then he walked back to the gate, because there was work to do. Chapter 4, The court that was the ancient Wizengamot convened in a room that hadn't been used in 200 years. It was under the Ministry building, not the regular Wizengamot courtroom with its tiered seats and cold lighting and atmosphere of institutional judgment, but below that, accessible through a door that had been sealed behind a false wall in the basement archives in 1707 and had apparently been there ever since, waiting. Gringotts had provided the location. Harry had provided the key, which was not a physical key but the recitation of a charter passage in Old English that Hermione had spent 48 hours perfecting to the phoneme, because she was Hermione and she wasn't going to have the founding document of Wizarding Britain's governance mispronounced on her watch. The door opened with the sound of old stone shifting, and behind it was a staircase. They went down. The chamber was circular and it was large, considerably larger than anything that should have fit in the space available, and the ceiling was vaulted in pale stone that caught the light from sconces that lit themselves as they entered, the flames gold and steady. The floor was polished to a dark mirror, and around the walls the seats rose in graduated tiers, each one marked at its back with a house sigil. Some of the sigils were current. Most were old names that Harry barely recognized, or didn't recognize at all, houses that had died out over the centuries, seats that had lapsed and never been reclaimed. In the center of the chamber, on the floor itself, was the charter seal. Not a decorative thing, a working seal, the original, inlaid in gold and iron and something that pulsed with old magic even from across the room. Harry stood at the bottom of the staircase and looked at it. "Right," he said. "Right," Ron agreed, from beside him, and his voice had the particular quality it got when he was impressed but was too busy calculating to fully express it. Hermione was already looking at the sigils. "The founding seats are there," she said, pointing. Potter, Gryffindor, Black, Slytherin, Peverell, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, the Hogwarts founders each had a Wizengamot seat. The Gryffindor line went extinct in the 14th century. Hufflepuffs merged with the Digby family. She stopped, turned, looked at Harry. "Harry. The Ravenclaw seat. What about it?" "The Ravenclaw line. I need to check something." She pulled parchment out of her bag and started writing. "You can check it after we've convened a 200-year-old court," Harry said. She kept writing. "I'm checking it now. It'll take 2 minutes. You have 5 before the proxy holders arrive." Harry let her check it and walked to the center of the chamber, to the charter seal, and stood on it. It was warm underfoot, not hot, but warm, the way sun-warmed stone is warm, though no sun had touched this floor in 2 centuries. He looked up at the vaulted ceiling, at the seats rising around him, at the empty chamber that had last held a full session before his great-great-grandparents were born. Sirius appeared at his shoulder. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm about to do something irreversible," Harry said. "You did something irreversible 2 days ago," Sirius said. "That's fair." Harry looked at the founder seats. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been waiting for this since I was 17 and didn't have the tools." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "Your father and I used to talk about the ministry. After Hogwarts, during the First War. We knew it was broken, we could see Fudge's predecessor doing the same things Fudge does. We just didn't know how to, we didn't have the paperwork," Harry said. Sirius laughed. "Yes. The paperwork." He paused. James would have loved that it came down to paperwork. He was terrible at paperwork but he would have loved it. The proxy holders began arriving through the staircase in 1s and 2s. Harry had spent most of the previous day making sure the proxy votes were valid and confirmed, 7 houses that still existed in some form, whose current heads had either responded to Harry's formal notification with written proxy agreements or had sent representatives. Most of them were elderly witches and wizards who had the look of people who had been quietly maintaining old family knowledge in the way that old families sometimes do, without noise, waiting for circumstances to make the knowledge relevant. There was Griselda Marchbanks, who Harry recognized from his OWL examinations, now representing the Marchbanks seat with the bearing of someone who has known this day was coming and has dressed accordingly. There was Tiberius Ogden, who Harry had seen resign from the Wizengamot over Fudge's handling of the Voldemort issue and who sat down in his house seat with a satisfaction that suggested he'd never expected to be glad he resigned. There was Arcturus Greengrass, who was young and carefully neutral, and who had sent a proxy because his family needed to see which way the wind set before committing fully, which Harry respected as honest. There were 6 others. Each one took their seat, and as they sat, the house sigils at the backs of the chairs lit up in a deep, warm gold. Neville sat in the Longbottom seat, and its sigil lit like the others, and Augusta stood at the back of the chamber because she didn't have a seat but had come because nothing short of a structural impediment was going to stop her witnessing this. Harry took the Potter seat. The Peverell seat, at his right, he left empty, it had been vacant long enough that one more session wouldn't hurt it. The Black seat Sirius occupied. The Slytherin seat Harry also occupied, by the right of dual lordship, and the slight logistical puzzle of how to sit in two seats simultaneously was resolved by the old magic in the room, which apparently had provision for this. A second seal appeared under his feet, connecting both seats, and both sigils lit. Hermione sat at the edge of the chamber, not in a seat, but with her parchment and her perfectly organized notes and her expression of someone doing three complex mental tasks simultaneously, which for Hermione was a normal Tuesday. Ron sat beside her. He had a list of house names with notes next to them, who owed what to whom in the old political structures, which families would respond to which arguments, the whole tangled web of wizarding political relationships that he'd grown up hearing about at the dinner table and had apparently retained with the clarity of someone who is quietly very good at something that nobody has ever asked him to demonstrate formally. "Quorum?" Harry asked. Hermione looked up from her parchment. 11 seated members with valid proxies or direct claims. Founding charter requires 9 for a valid session. We have quorum. Harry looked around the chamber. The seated members looked back at him. Some with curiosity, some with assessment, some with the particular quality of old people watching something they've outlived their expectations to see. Tiberius Ogden had his arms crossed and was trying not to smile, which was a losing battle. Griselda Marchbanks had her hands folded on the seat arm and her expression was entirely composed, but her eyes were very much alive. Harry stood. "The ancient Wisingamot is now in session," he said, and his voice carried in the chamber in the way that voices carry in spaces that have been built for the purpose. "Under founding charter authority, called by Lord Potter-Black-Slytherin-Peverell, with founding Lord veto authority on all motions. The session is valid, quorate, and legally supersedes any concurrent session convened by ministry-derived authority." He paused. "We're not here to destroy anything. We're here to restore something. Those are different intentions and I want everyone in this room to understand that from the start." Griselda Marchbanks said, stated plainly, "Lord Potter. What do you want from this session?" "3 things, Harry said. "First, the formal validation of all present seats, to establish the legitimacy of the quorum in a form that can be submitted to Gringotts as public record. Second, the formal review of the Ministry's governing charter amendment of 1707, specifically the clauses that weren't in the original. Third, a mandate. Not for dissolution. For review." He looked around. "I'm not trying to leave Wizarding Britain without a government. I'm trying to make sure the government it has is actually the one the charter intended. The Ministry will challenge this session's validity," Arcturus Greengrass said. He was young to be in this room, Harry thought, early 30s, careful in the way careful people are careful, watching everything before committing to a reaction. "They'll try," Harry said. "They don't have the legal standing to succeed. The Ministry was created by the Wisingamot, not the reverse. This session predates their authority. They have aurors," Greengrass said. "Not as a threat, as a practical observation. Aurors who arrest members of a valid Wisingamot session are in violation of the founding charter. Personally liable, legally void actions, full paper trail." Ron said it from the edge of the chamber, almost casually, looking at his notes, and there was a faint surprise in the room at his speaking, the youngest person present, no seat, no formal position, but his voice had the easy confidence of someone saying something that's simply true. He looked up. "Sorry. You're my advisor," Harry said. "Speak when you have something relevant." Ron nodded. "They don't have a legal avenue. If they send aurors in here, it creates the exact public legitimacy crisis they're trying to avoid." Tiberius Ogden unfolded his arms. "The boy's right. He usually is," Harry said. Ron looked carefully neutral about this, which meant he was pleased. The session proceeded with the systematic efficiency of people who have done their preparation and know what they're there to accomplish. Seat validations were recorded by Hermione with the completeness of a court registrar. This, Harry had quietly arranged in advance, because someone needed to do it and it needed to be done with perfect accuracy, and there was no one on earth who would do it with more perfect accuracy than Hermione Granger. Each member confirmed their claim, the charter seal and the floor pulsed once in acknowledgement of each confirmation, and the record was made. Then Hermione stood and read the 1707 charter amendment against the original, clause by clause, with the missing provisions highlighted. The chamber listened. The silence was the particular silence of people absorbing information they'd suspected but not confirmed, and it deepened as the list of omissions grew, and by the time she reached the 14th omitted clause, Griselda Marchbanks's composed expression had acquired an edge that suggested the examinations board had better be glad they weren't being reviewed today. "This is the document the ministry has been operating under," Hermione said, and she held up the ministry's version, and this, she held up the Gringotts original, is the document they should have been operating under. She set both copies on the charter seal for comparison. They lay side by side, and even from a distance you could see the difference. The 1707 amendment, Tiberius Ogden said slowly, removed the Wisingamot oversight clauses. All 14, Hermione said. Selectively. Over approximately 60 years, through a series of procedural readings that were each small enough not to attract significant attention individually, but which cumulatively removed every provision that limited ministry authority over the Wisingamot. "That's not a series of oversights," Griselda Marchbanks said. "No," Harry agreed. "It isn't." The chamber was very quiet. "The motion," Harry said, "is to formally recognize the original founding charter as the binding document of wizarding governance, superseding the 1707 amendment in all provisions. The ministry retains its administrative function. The Wisingamot, this body, retains the governing authority the founding charter vested in it. All ministry legislation passed under the claimed authority of the amended charter will be subject to review over a period of 18 months, with existing law remaining in effect during review to prevent any gap in civil order." He looked around the chamber. Discussion. What followed was 40 minutes of the most substantive political conversation Harry had been present for, and he sat through all of it and contributed when needed and listened when it was better to listen. Greengrass asked careful, precise questions about the review mechanism and got precise answers from Hermione. Ogden talked about specific ministry overreaches with the passion of a man who had watched them happen and been unable to stop them through the existing system. Marchbanks was spare with her words, but every sentence was accurate and surgical and moved the conversation exactly where it needed to go. Sirius said almost nothing throughout, which was interesting. He listened and watched and occasionally exchanged a glance with Harry that communicated something, and Harry thought that 12 years of Azkaban had done something unexpected to Sirius alongside all the obvious damage. It had given him patience. A kind of stillness he'd never had at 21. Neville said two things. The first was a quiet observation about the ministry's treatment of werewolves and other classified beings, and the provision in the original charter about the rights of all magical persons that had been one of the 14 omitted clauses, and the second was a very short sentence near the end of the discussion that happened to resolve the most contentious procedural point anyone had raised, and when he said it the chamber went quiet in a specific way, the way it goes quiet when something exactly right has been said by the last person you expected to say it. After the second thing, Augusta Longbottom, at the back of the chamber, said nothing. But she stood slightly differently. The vote was taken. The motion passed 10-1, Greengrass abstained rather than opposing, which Harry read as a family keeping its options open, which was fine. One abstention was not the same as one vote against. The charter seal pulsed, deeply, 3 times. "The motion is carried," Harry said. "The record will be submitted to Gringotts within 24 hours for public filing." He paused. One more item. He reached into his robes and produced a document. Under the original founding charter, Article 9, the Wisingamot has the authority to call members of any governing body to answer questions relating to their administration. "I'm filing a formal summons for Minister Fudge to appear before this body within 30 days. He won't come voluntarily," Ogden said. "He doesn't have to come voluntarily," Harry said. "He has to come." He set the summons on the charter seal. It sank into the gold and iron and old magic of the floor like a letter going into a post box. The founding charter compels attendance. The ministry's own procedures implement charter law. They can't refuse the summons without formally acknowledging that they don't operate under charter law, which proves our point for us. Tiberius Ogden looked at Harry across the chamber for a long moment. How old are you? 16, Harry said. Merlin's beard, said Ogden, which was, Harry felt, an entirely proportionate response. They were coming up the staircase, back into the Ministry basement archives, when Umbridge made her move. She had not come alone. There were 6 Aurors with her, led by Dawlish, the same Aurors who had been with Fudge 2 days ago, minus Fudge, plus Umbridge, which was a subtraction and addition that left things considerably worse. She was in pink robes, as always, and her face had the expression Harry had seen once before, the controlled, pleased expression of someone who believes they have a winning card and is looking forward to playing it. Lord Potter, she said, with the emphasis she always put on titles she didn't think the holder deserved. What a surprise. Is it? Harry said. You'll have to come with us. She produced a folded parchment. Emergency Ministerial Decree No. 27, signed this morning by the Minister. All persons involved in the convening of an unauthorized Wizengamot session are subject to immediate detention pending, under what authority? Hermione said, before Harry could speak, and her voice had an edge to it that was new, not the academic edge, something sharper and angrier. She took 2 steps forward. Ministerial Decree No. 27 was signed this morning, you said. The ancient Wizengamot session was convened this morning. The ministerial decree would need to have preceded the session to be applicable, and an emergency decree can only be issued in response to existing action, not anticipated action, which means it's retroactively punitive legislation, which is explicitly prohibited under the Founding Charter Article 19, which, as of this morning, is the binding governing document. Umbridge looked at Hermione with the expression of someone who has encountered an argument more sophisticated than expected and is recalculating. The Founding Charter's authority is contested, by whom? Harry said. The Ministry. The Ministry was created by the Founding Charter. It can't contest its own founding document. That's not a legal position, it's a paradox. Umbridge's eyes flicked to the Aurors. A small signal, barely perceptible, but Harry caught it, and he watched Dawlish's hand move. Dawlish, Harry said quietly. Don't. Dawlish stopped. Not because of the word, because of the quality of the voice that said it. The same voice he'd heard in the corridor 2 days ago, the same complete, unperturbed certainty. If you detain any member of this session, Harry continued, at the same volume, looking directly at Umbridge, you will be in personal criminal violation of Founding Charter Article 12, Gringotts Treaty Clause 7, and 3 provisions of the Wizengamot's own rules of procedure. Gringotts will file criminal charges on behalf of the wronged parties within 24 hours. The charges carry mandatory sentences. He paused. Including for the person who ordered the detentions. Umbridge looked at him. Her face was controlled, but something moved behind it, something that was trying to find an angle and not finding one. You're a child, she said. It wasn't even contemptuous, it was stated as a fact she found inexplicable. I'm a lord of 4 houses, Harry said. In this building, one of those houses supersedes your authority completely. He let that sit for a moment. But I'm not interested in arresting anyone today. I'm interested in doing things correctly. He looked at the Aurors, each of them in turn. You're not her tools. You're law enforcement officers operating under a charter framework. When you go home tonight, read Article 12. If you have questions, Gringotts has a public copy. 2 of the Aurors exchanged a glance. This isn't over, Umbridge said. No, Harry agreed. It isn't. He held her gaze for a moment, not threatening, just clear, the way you hold a candle near something dark to show what's there. But I notice you haven't tried to arrest me. Her jaw tightened. That means you know the decree won't hold, he said. Which means today you came here to make noise. I understand the strategy, noise creates uncertainty, uncertainty slows me down. He tilted his head slightly. Except I'm not uncertain. I'm methodical. He stepped forward, and she held her ground, but something in her posture recalculated, just fractionally. I know what you think this is. You think it's a power grab. You think I'm after the same thing Voldemort's after, just with better paperwork. Her face changed at the name, the reflexive flinch that people couldn't quite suppress. I'm not, Harry said. I'm trying to build something that makes power grabs impossible. And the difference between me and the people you're actually afraid of is that I'm doing it in the light, with witnesses, through proper process, and I'll be accountable to the structure I'm creating. He looked at her steadily. Which is more than I can say for the decree you just tried to use. The corridor was very quiet. Umbridge looked at him, and the thing behind her eyes wasn't quite calculable. It was the complex reaction of someone who had expected one kind of opponent and found another, and who was smart enough to understand the difference even while being too committed to her position to acknowledge it openly. The minister will have a response, she said. I'll be at this address, Harry said, and handed her a card, Grimmauld Place, properly listed. I'm not hiding from anyone. He walked past her. The others followed, Sirius last, who gave Umbridge a smile of such aristocratic pleasantness that it appeared to cause her physical discomfort, which Harry noted privately as a skill he should ask Sirius to teach him. The Aurors parted. Not because they were told to, because they chose to. Small but significant. They walked through the ministry atrium, past the Golden Fountain, out into the London air, and the summer afternoon was warm and loud with traffic and pigeons and a busker somewhere nearby doing something ambitious with a violin, and Harry stood on the pavement and breathed it in. She's going to escalate, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. What does that look like? She'll find something in the existing legislation, something obscure, something procedural, that she can use to challenge the session's records before we get them to Gringotts. Harry was already thinking. We need those records filed by midnight. I'll go directly, Hermione said. Take Ron. I was already going to take Ron. I know, Harry said. Sirius was looking at the ministry building with an expression that Harry couldn't quite read, complex, layered, the expression of someone for whom a place has many meanings that don't resolve into one. I spent 20 years believing this place was fixable from the inside, he said. Then I spent 12 years in Azkaban thinking about whether I'd been right. He looked at Harry. I wasn't. No, Harry said. But the people who work in it mostly aren't bad. They're just, institutional. They do what institutions tell them to do. Until someone changes the institution, Sirius said. Until someone changes the institution, Harry agreed. They walked down the street, and the afternoon moved around them, and above the city the sky was very blue and the summer had the quality of a thing at full height, all its energy present and expressed. Harry's mind was moving quickly, the summons, the Gringotts filing, the 30-day window for Fudge to respond, Umbridge's next move, the things he hadn't accounted for yet. He thought about Amelia Bones and the fact that she hadn't appeared today, which meant she was either staying deliberately clear or gathering information, and both options were worth monitoring. He thought about the letter he needed to write to Scrimgeour, because Scrimgeour was the Auror department head and was going to be either a serious problem or a serious asset, and it was better to approach him directly and find out which. And underneath all of it, in the place where he kept the things he hadn't addressed yet, he thought about Voldemort. Dumbledore had said he was trying to understand rather than destroy. Harry turned this over. Voldemort's entire strategy had always been about controlling the landscape, making himself the most frightening thing in it so that everything else arranged itself in relation to him. And now something had arrived that didn't arrange itself in relation to him at all, that was operating on an entirely separate axis of power. That would make Voldemort curious. And curious was dangerous. But it was also predictable. Curious people, even terrifying ones, came looking. And Harry, for the first time in his life, was not running. He was standing still, in the light, with witnesses. Let him come looking. Hermione sent a Patronus at 11:30 that night, documents filed. Gringotts confirmed. Ragnarok says they're already in the public ledger. It's done. Harry read it in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place, sitting with the 1907 Black family political correspondence file open in front of him, because Phineas Nigellus had been right about it. There was something in here, a correspondence between the Black family patriarch of 1907 and 3 other ancient house heads about exactly the kind of ministry overreach he was fighting now, and in the margins of one letter was a handwritten note in a different hand: "The remedy exists. It has always existed. We simply need someone with enough standing to invoke it." The note was dated 1912. The Black family patriarch who'd written it had died in 1920, and either nobody had found the file afterward or nobody had had the standing to invoke whatever remedy he'd meant, and the knowledge had sat here in the family library for over 100 years. Harry looked at the note for a long time. Then he turned the page, and started reading. Outside, London was quiet in the late-night way it got quiet, not silent, because London was never silent, but reduced to its essential self: traffic and the river and the distant sound of someone's night, and the summer darkness pressing gently against the windows of the old house, and somewhere out there a wizarding world in the middle of something it didn't yet fully understand was happening. Harry understood it. He had the paperwork and the standing and the plan. And he had, for the first time in his life, absolutely no intention of slowing down. Chapter 5, The War on Two Fronts. The attack came at dawn. Not from the Ministry. Harry had been watching for Ministry moves, and Hermione had 3 early warning systems in place around Grimmauld Place that would give them 15 minutes notice of any official approach. Not from Umbridge, who had been quiet for 4 days in a way that was more alarming than noise but hadn't yet produced anything actionable. It came from the east side of the house, through the kitchen window, and it was fast. Harry was already awake. He'd been awake since 4, at the kitchen table with the Black family correspondence and a map of the wizarding political structure he'd been redrawing from scratch. He heard the words snap the way you hear a circuit trip, a specific, clean sound in the magical awareness he'd been developing since the blood rite, something that felt like a new sense, raw and slightly too sharp. He was on his feet and had his wand out before the window cracked. 3 Death Eaters came through the wall. Not the window, the wall, using a reducto combination that Harry had read about but never seen used against a building, and the plaster came apart in a controlled burst and the 3 of them stepped through in the grey pre-dawn light with their masks on and their wands raised. Harry hit the first one with a blasting curse before they'd fully cleared the hole. Not a warning shot, a direct hit, full power, and the Death Eater went backward through the wall he'd just come through and didn't come back. The second got a stunner sideways, and Harry was already moving, because standing still in a 3-on-1 situation was how people got killed. He went left, put the kitchen table between himself and the third one, and the killing curse that came for him hit the table instead and the table became a pile of very old wood. He fired back. The third Death Eater was fast, faster than the first 2, competent in the way that said training rather than natural ability, someone who'd practiced this. They traded 3 exchanges in the narrow space of the ruined kitchen, and Harry felt a cutting curse graze his left arm and registered it as information rather than pain, because pain was something to deal with after, and then he feinted left and cast right and hit the third Death Eater with a body bind that dropped them straight down. Silence. Harry stood in the ruined kitchen with plaster dust settling around him and his wand up and his arm leaking blood down his elbow, and listened. Nothing else came through the wall. He heard feet on the stairs, Sirius, then Ron, then a moment later Neville, who had been staying at Grimmauld Place since the Wisengamot session because going back to his grandmother's house had felt, to both of them, like leaving the field at an inopportune moment. Sirius took in the room in one scan: 3 Death Eaters, 2 down and 1 bound, 1 hole in the wall, 1 nephew bleeding, and the expression on his face went through something fast and fierce before settling. "How bad?" he said, coming to Harry. "Graze," Harry said. "I'm fine." "It's not a graze, it's serious." Harry looked at him steadily. "I'm fine. Check the perimeter." Sirius looked at him for one more moment with the expression of a man processing the experience of watching his 16-year-old godson handle 3 Death Eaters and being simultaneously proud and alarmed by it. Then he went to check the perimeter. Ron had the bound Death Eater's wand. Neville was by the door with his own wand out, checking the corridor. Anyone else in the house? Harry asked. No, Neville said. Hermione's wards would have, wait. He turned. The wards. Why didn't they approach wards? They came in above street level, Harry said. He was already thinking about it. They approached directly to the exterior wall and came through. The approach wards are set at street level. He looked at the hole in the wall. Someone told them how to get around the wards. Someone who knew the wards, Ron said. Someone who knew this house, Harry said. They both thought about it for a moment. Creature, Ron said. Maybe. Or someone who's been here before. Harry looked at the bound Death Eater on the floor. He walked over and removed the mask. He didn't recognize the face, a man in his 40s, angular, with the particular blankness of someone who has committed themselves entirely to a single cause and let everything else atrophy. Not one of the inner circle. Voldemort's equivalent of a probe, sent to test, not to kill outright. If killing outright had been the mission, they'd have sent better. This was a message, Harry said. What message? Neville asked. That he knows where I am. And that he wants me to know he knows. Harry straightened. Which is interesting, because it means he's not ready to move directly. If he were, he wouldn't send 3. He'd come himself. He's not afraid of you, Sirius said from the doorway, back from the perimeter, dusting plaster off his shoulder. Not yet. But he's recalculating, Harry said. Yes. He cleaned up his arm with a basic healing charm. The cut was shallow, 3 inches, more messy than Sirius, and looked at the kitchen. It was the second time in his life he'd stood in a ruined kitchen and taken stock, and the thought was brief and not sentimental and passed quickly. We moved the base of operations, he said. Today. We can't stay here now, the location is compromised. Where? Ron asked. Potter Manor, Harry said. It's warded at a level Grimmauld Place isn't. The Potter family wards have been in continuous magical effect since the 15th century, and none of Voldemort's people know to look there. Dumbledore does, Sirius said quietly. Yes, Harry said. And Dumbledore is not currently our enemy. He'd want us at Potter Manor over Grimmauld Place, it's safer. He paused. I'll tell him we're moving. I won't tell him where we're moving until we're there. Sirius almost smiled. Trust but verify. Something like that. They were packed and gone within an hour, and Harry turned at the door of Grimmauld Place and looked at it once, the dark wallpaper, the house elf heads, the bleak hallway, and then walked out. Potter Manor in the early morning was a different place from Potter Manor in the afternoon of their first visit. The summer light came in at a low angle and the restored gardens held it differently, the lavender beds catching it and the climbing roses throwing shadows across the drive, and the old stone of the house warm and solid against the sky. Harry stood at the front gate and said the activation phrase and the manor acknowledged him with the same quality of recognition as before, deep and unhurried. They went inside, and the portraits were awake, and Euphemia Potter said good morning to Harry with a warmth that was still slightly carefully modulated but was warming daily, and Harry said good morning back and directed everyone to rooms and then went up to the study. He sat in the claiming chair, not for ceremony, just because it was the right place to think in this room, and wrote 3 letters. The first was to Amelia Bones. He'd been waiting for the right moment to approach her, and the attack this morning had clarified the timing. She needed to know that Voldemort had escalated to direct action against him, and she needed to hear it directly rather than through ministry channels that Umbridge had influence over. Madam Bones, he wrote. 3 Death Eaters attacked my residence this morning. I am unharmed. I believe you should know this before official channels deliver a version of events that may not be entirely accurate. I'd like to meet at a location of your choosing within 48 hours. I have information relevant to the current war effort that supersedes the Ministry's position on my legal standing, and I think you are the person in this building most capable of evaluating it honestly. Lord H.J. Potter-Black-Slytherin-Peverell. The second letter was to Scrimgeour, the head Auror. Harry had been thinking about how to approach this one since the corridor confrontation with Dawlish. Scrimgeour was not a man who responded to appeals to principle, he was practical and political and deeply invested in the Auror Department's authority. The approach had to match the man. Director Scrimgeour, he wrote. The Auror Department operates under Founding Charter authority as well as Ministry mandate. The Founding Charter version of the Auror Department's mandate is considerably broader and less politically constrained than the Ministry version. I think this difference would interest you. I'd like to talk, not as opponents, which neither of us needs right now, but as people who share an interest in functional law enforcement during a war. Lord H. J. Potter-Black-Slytherin-Peverell, the third letter he held for a moment before writing. Then he wrote it simply. Professor Dumbledore. Grimmauld Place was attacked this morning. I'm safe. We've moved. I'll tell you where when we've settled in, give it 2 days. There's something in the Slytherin Vault documents I need to discuss with you face to face. Not about the Wizengamot, about Voldemort. About why he's recalculating instead of striking. I think I know what he's waiting for. Harry he sent all three with Hedwig and the 2 Manor Owls, and then sat for a moment with his hands around a cup of tea, thinking about what he'd written in that last letter. He'd been thinking about it since the kitchen fight. Voldemort had sent 3 Death Eaters. Not to kill, to measure. To see what Harry would do, how he'd fight, what his instincts were under pressure. Which meant Voldemort was learning him. In the Slytherin Vault documents, specifically in the older correspondence, there was a passage that had been nagging at Harry since he'd read it on the bus, 3 paragraphs in a private letter from Salazar Slytherin to someone whose name had been removed from the record, about the nature of magical inheritance and the concept of a magical anchor. A living person whose magical signature is so deeply tied to a bloodline's accumulated power that their continued existence amplifies or diminishes that power in proportion to their own living strength. He'd read it 3 times and each time arrived at the same uncomfortable conclusion. Voldemort needed him alive. Not out of sentiment, nothing so human. But because Harry was the last living Slytherin heir, and the Slytherin Lordship power, now active and confirmed, was anchored in Harry's living magic. Voldemort had created Horcruxes to cheat death, but the Slytherin Lordship power didn't transfer through Horcruxes, it transferred through blood. Alive, Harry represented the source of that power. Dead, if the Lordship proper protocols applied, the power would simply seal itself again, go dormant, and Voldemort would lose access to it permanently. He didn't want Harry dead. He wanted Harry in his control. That was the recalculation. Harry drank his tea and thought about this, and thought about the fact that it was useful information. Knowing what your opponent wants from you is one of the most powerful tactical advantages available, and thought about what it meant for his next move. He needed to be very publicly powerful in ways that were very publicly documented, so that anyone attempting to capture or control him had to deal with the full legal weight of what that meant. He was already doing that. But he needed to do more. He needed to close the Horcrux problem. He found Hermione in the Manor Library at mid-morning. She was surrounded by books with the focused happiness of someone who has been given access to a very good library and has not yet found the edge of it, which was the Hermione Granger natural habitat. "How's the arm?" she said, without looking up. "Fine. Hermione, I need you on something specific." She looked up at that. That specific something tone was one she had calibrated responses for. "Horcruxes," Harry said. She closed the book she was reading and gave him her full attention. "How many?" "Dumbledore thinks at least 6. Possibly more." He sat across from her. "I need you to approach this the way you approach everything, methodically, from the founding principles up. Not what Dumbledore has told us. What we can deduce or discover independently." "Why independently?" "Because Dumbledore has a plan for the Horcruxes and it involves me dying," Harry said. He said it flatly, not dramatically, because it was information and he'd processed the emotional component of it at 2 a.m. 2 nights ago and come out the other side with something that wasn't peace exactly but was functional. The Slytherin Vault has Salazar's notes on the original theory of soul anchors, Horcruxes are a corruption of the anchor concept. If we understand the original theory, we might be able to find an approach that doesn't end with me dead. Hermione stared at him. He told you you have to die, she said. He hasn't said it directly. But I found the prophecy's full text in the Potter library. There's an annotation in my grandfather Henry's handwriting that he made after consulting with Dumbledore in 1980. Neither shall live while the other survives. There's a Horcrux in me, Hermione. Voldemort's soul fragment. It's been there since I was 1 year old. The library was very quiet. Hermione looked at him for a long time. He watched her process it, the quick, comprehensive, rigorous processing that was her particular genius, moving through the implications and the structure and the logic of it with the efficiency of a mind that didn't waste motion. He could see her arrive at the same place he'd arrived at 2 nights ago, and then, this was the part that was different from him, immediately start looking for what he'd missed. The Slytherin notes on soul anchors, she said. I've been reading them. Come and look at this. He'd brought the book up from the vault documents, the ancient one with the first page warning about survival. He found the passage and set it in front of her. She read it twice. The anchor concept is based on consent, she said slowly. The original magical anchor, the bloodline power transfer, only activates when the anchor willingly accepts the transfer. A forced anchor breaks differently from a willing one. She looked up. When Voldemort's killing curse hit you as a baby, it wasn't willing, Harry said. It wasn't a designed soul anchor. It was an accident of extremely powerful magic meeting extremely powerful magic, his killing curse, my mother's protection, and the Peverell bloodline. The Peverell bloodline, Hermione repeated. The Hallows aren't just objects, Harry said. That's what I think the Peverell vault document means, the one that said you will know what to do when the time is right. The Hallows are pieces of a framework. Together they don't just make someone master of death, they create a containment structure for soul magic. Ignotus Peverell built the stone, the cloak, and the wand as a system for dealing with exactly this kind of problem. Hermione was very still. A forced soul fragment lodged in a living person, Harry continued, is different from a voluntary Horcrux in an object. It's unstable. It's subject to the living person's magical environment. And if the living person's magic becomes significantly more powerful than the fragment's magic, he looked at her. The fragment can be expelled, she said. Her voice was careful and precise, and the careful precision meant she was very excited. Not killed, you can't kill a piece of soul. But expelled. Forced out. And then contained, Harry said. By the correct framework. The Hallows, she said. The Hallows, he confirmed. You need all three. I have the cloak and the stone. The wand, he paused. Dumbledore has the wand, she said. Dumbledore has the Elder Wand, Harry said. Yes. Another silence. He's going to say giving it to you is dangerous, Hermione said. He might. But he owes me the conversation. Harry sat back. I'm not going to demand it. I'm going to explain what I know and let him make the choice. He paused. He might surprise me. He's been doing that lately. Hermione looked at the passage again. This will take time to work out properly. The ritual, if there is a ritual, would need to be designed specifically, not just extrapolated from the theory. I'd need weeks of research. You have weeks, Harry said. We have 30 days before Fudge has to respond to the summons, and I'm not picking another fight until the first one resolves. Harry. You just fought 3 Death Eaters at dawn. They picked that fight, Harry said. I'm just saying I'm not initiating anything new for a few weeks. He looked at her. The Horcrux research is the most important thing right now. More important than the ministry process, even. Because if Voldemort has 6 or 7 of them and we don't have a way to deal with them, everything else is building on sand. She nodded. She was already thinking. He could see it in the way her eyes had gone slightly unfocused, turned inward, the processing beginning. The other Horcruxes, she said. We need to know what they are. I found a list, Harry said. He reached into his jacket. In the Slytherin vault, there were items of Slytherins that were taken from the estate over the centuries, and the vault document has a record of them. Lockets, cups, diaries. He set the list on the table. I recognize these. The diary, 2nd year, that was a Horcrux. The locket is in the Black family inventory, it was in the Grimmauld Place cabinet. I need to go back for it. We left in a hurry, Hermione said, looking at the list. Creature knows where it is. He's been told about the change of address, Sirius sent him ahead. I'll have him bring it. Harry looked at the list. A cup, most likely Helga Hufflepuff's, based on the Slytherin records. It'll be in the Lestrange vault at Gringotts. A diadem, Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, Hermione said, and there was something in her voice that made Harry look up. That's what I was going to tell you at the Wisengamot chamber, she said. The Ravenclaw seat. I was checking the lineage. Harry, the Ravenclaw line, the main line went extinct in the 12th century. But there's a secondary line, like the Slytherin line, that continued through, she stopped. Harry looked at her. Through the Potter line, she said. Iolanthe Peverell's mother was a Ravenclaw by descent. Distant, 6 generations, but it's there. The Gringotts records would confirm it. She looked at him steadily. You might hold the Ravenclaw connection too. Harry was quiet for a moment. That's potentially useful, she said. The diadem is in Hogwarts. Helena Ravenclaw's ghost, the Grey Lady, knows where it is. If you have a Ravenclaw connection, she might talk to me, Harry said. He thought about the Grey Lady, quiet, sad, seen in corridors for years and never really spoken to. I'll try. And the snake, Hermione said. Nagini. The Slytherin vault notes mention the bond between a Slytherin heir and a Parseltongue familiar. She's a Horcrux, Harry said. And she's also his last human protection, he keeps her close. She'll be the hardest. Last, Hermione said. Last, Harry agreed. They sat with the list between them, the morning light coming through the manor library windows, and somewhere in the house Harry could hear Ron and Neville in conversation, voices carrying through old walls with the warmth of people settling into a space and beginning to make it their own. Harry, Hermione said. In the Slytherin notes. Is there anything about you, specifically, about what you are magically, after the blood rite and the claiming? He'd been expecting this question. Yes, he said. Salazar's notes describe the fully active state of a multi-lordship heir as, he calls it a convergence point. When 4 or more bloodline powers are active simultaneously in one person, the combined magical signature becomes, he paused, looking for the right word. Something different. Not just more powerful. Different in kind. Different how? The notes describe it as, he found the passage in his memory, the exact phrasing, because he'd read it enough times. The convergence point is visible to magic as a fixed star is visible to sailors, it does not move, it does not hide, it cannot be diminished by distance or opposition. It simply is, and all magic in proximity must account for it. Hermione was quiet. Which is why Voldemort is recalculating, Harry said. He can feel it. Whatever the Horcrux in me was registering as before, background noise, something manageable, it's not that anymore. He looked at his hands. I changed the landscape. And he doesn't know yet whether that works for him or against him. It works against him, Hermione said firmly. Eventually, Harry said. Yes. Amelia Bones came to Potter Manor the next morning, alone, which was itself a significant message. She was a compact, precise woman with a monocle and the expression of someone who made decisions quickly and lived with them cleanly, and she stood in the entrance hall of Potter Manor and looked at it with the expression of someone recalibrating several assumptions simultaneously. Harry met her himself. No intermediaries, he'd thought about having Sirius present and decided against it, because Sirius and Amelia Bones had a complicated history and this first meeting needed to be straightforward. "Madam Bones," he said. "Lord Potter," she said. She looked at him in the assessing way she had, not unkind, but thorough. "You look younger than I expected." "I keep hearing that," Harry said. "Come in." He took her to the study. Tea appeared. The manor had house elves who had been in dormant service for 15 years and were apparently very enthusiastic about having a purpose again. Bones sat down and accepted tea and looked at the room with the same calibrating expression. "You filed a founding charter notice," she said. "You convened the ancient Wisengamot. You freed Sirius Black. You've served the minister with a summons he legally can't ignore." She paused. "And then Death Eaters tried to kill you." "Measure me," Harry said. "Not kill." She looked at him. "The distinction matters to you." "It changes the tactical picture significantly," Harry said. "Voldemort wants me alive. That means his people have orders to capture, not kill. Which means I have more room to maneuver than I would if the instruction were lethal." Bones was quiet for a moment. She set her tea down. "I've spent the last 4 days reading the founding charter," she said. "The Gringotts original. And you're right." She said it without visible difficulty, the way someone says something uncomfortable when they've decided that being right matters more than being comfortable. "The ministry has been operating outside its founding mandate. The 1707 amendment was a series of quiet usurpations, done under several ministers across several decades, and the effect was cumulative and it was, yes. You're right." Harry waited. "I spent 20 years in this institution," she said. "Working within it, trying to fix it from inside. Sending people to Azkaban who deserved to go, and watching people who deserved to go walk free. Watching Fudge, watching his predecessor, prioritize comfort and career over function." She looked at Harry steadily. "And I told myself that the institution was worth preserving. That the answer was better people in it, not a different structure." "What changed your mind?" Harry asked. "You did," she said. "Not the notice. The method. You're not burning anything down. You're restoring it to what it was supposed to be. She paused. "That's harder to argue against." "I don't want you to argue against it," Harry said. "I want your help." "With the ministry process?" "With the war," Harry said. "The ministry process is the political front. The war is the other front. And right now the war is being run by Dumbledore through the Order of the Phoenix, which is an ad hoc private organization with no legal standing and no official authority, operating in opposition to a ministry that isn't taking the threat seriously enough." He leaned forward. "Under the founding charter, the Wisengamot has the authority to convene and direct an official war council. Not the ministry, the Wisengamot. I want to do that. And I want the head of the DMLE sitting at that table." Bones looked at him for a long moment. "You want to absorb the order," she said. "I want to give it legal standing and proper resources," Harry said. "Dumbledore's people are good, most of them. But they're working without official authority, which limits what they can do. If the Wisengamot convenes a war council, everything they do is legal, documented, and properly resourced. Dumbledore won't, Dumbledore will adapt," Harry said. "He's been doing it for 70 years. He'll see the strategic logic." He paused. "What I need from you, right now, is a commitment not to oppose the Wisengamot's authority. You don't have to endorse everything immediately, I understand the institutional position. But when the DMLE receives the mandate review documents, I need you not to bury them." Bones looked at him. She had very clear eyes, the kind that didn't shift around when they were meeting yours, the kind that were actually looking. "You're 16, she said. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm also Lord of 4 houses, I'm legally operating outside ministry jurisdiction on one of them, I've been fighting Voldemort since I was 1 year old, and I have the founding charter, the Gringotts validation, and the ancient Wisingamot session records on my side. He met her eyes steadily. The age is relevant to other things. It's not relevant to the legal standing. A long pause. The summons to Fudge, she said. He has to respond. He knows he has to respond. He'll find a way to delay. He has 30 days, Harry said. After 30 days, non-compliance is itself a founding charter violation. At which point the Wisingamot can formally censure the minister, and censure under the original charter is different from a modern motion of no confidence. It's binding. Bones picked up her tea again. She looked at it for a moment. The DMLE will not actively oppose the founding charter notice, she said. I can't say more than that, not yet. But I will not bury the documents. That's enough for now, Harry said. And the War Council, consider it. Take your time. Harry stood. One more thing. Umbridge. Bones's expression shifted, something colder moving behind it, which told Harry that whatever she knew about Umbridge was not limited to what he knew. What about her? She's going to do something, Harry said. I don't know what yet, but she's been quiet for 5 days after trying to arrest members of a valid Wisingamot session, and that's not her not acting. That's her preparing. He looked at Bones carefully. When it happens, whatever it is, I need you to be in a position to contain it on the ministry side. Not protect me. Contain her. You think you can handle what she throws at you, Bones said. I know I can, Harry said. What I can't do is handle it and do everything else at the same time without a ministry person who can officially document and respond to it. He paused. If she steps outside ministry law, and I think she will, I want a record and a witness. Bones looked at him. You're setting a trap. I'm creating a situation where whatever she does in front of consequences, Harry said. That's just good planning. Bones almost smiled, not quite, but in the vicinity of it. She stood, and they shook hands, her grip firm and direct, and she left. Harry stood at the study window and watched her walk down the manor drive, and thought that she was going to be all right. Not an ally yet, something more honest than an ally, which was a person who would do the right thing even when it wasn't the politically comfortable thing. Those were rarer than allies, and they were worth more. The Patronus arrived at midnight. It was a phoenix, Dumbledore's, the silvery echo of Fawkes that Harry had seen before, and it landed on the study desk where Harry was still working, and it spoke in Dumbledore's measured voice, Harry. I've received your letter. What you've described about the soul anchor theory matches something I've been working toward but hadn't fully resolved. I believe you're right, and I believe I owe you a conversation about the Elder Wand. Come to Hogwarts tomorrow evening. Come alone, if you're comfortable doing so. If not, bring whoever you trust. Albus. Harry read the Patronus twice, watched it speak, the way Patronus messages played like recordings, and then sat with it for a moment. Come alone, if you're comfortable. The qualifier was new. Everything Dumbledore had said in the past had assumed Harry's comfort didn't require consideration. He was changing. Old and still making errors of long habit, but changing. Good, Harry said quietly to the empty study. He went to bed at 1 a.m. and slept well again, which he was beginning to think was simply a feature of sleeping in his family's house, surrounded by his family's magic, with the knowledge that he had, for the first time, built something that couldn't be taken from him in a single night. He woke at 5 to the sound of the manor's wards activating. Not a breach, a notification. Something at the perimeter, moving. He was at the window in seconds, wand up, looking out at the pre-dawn grounds. Then the perimeter's notification changed character, from approach to known, because the manor wards had learned the signatures of everyone currently living in it, and apparently they'd been extended to include one more signature at some point that Harry hadn't authorized, which meant the house itself had done it, and the house recognized, Voldemort stood at the gate. Not with an army. Not with Death Eaters. Alone. Wearing plain dark robes, no mask, no theatrical staging, and he was looking at the manor with an expression that was complex in the way that complex things are when they've been compressed into a face not designed to show complexity. He looked curious. And something else. Something Harry hadn't seen on that face before. Uncertain. Harry stood at the window for a moment, looking down at him. Voldemort looked up at the window. Their eyes met across the distance. Harry didn't move. He didn't flinch, didn't duck back, didn't reach for his wand beyond the wand already in his hand. He stood in the window of his family's house and looked at the thing that had destroyed his family and felt, not fear, not hatred exactly, something colder and more functional than either, clarity. He held Voldemort's gaze. After a moment, Voldemort looked away. Not in defeat, assessing. The way a chess player looks away from the board not because they've lost their nerve but because they need to see the whole picture. Then he was gone. No dramatic exit, simply gone, the way extremely powerful people sometimes simply cease to be present. Harry stood at the window for another moment. Then he put his wand down and went back to his desk. He picked up his quill and wrote at the bottom of his current page of notes, he came to look. Not to fight. He's trying to understand what he's dealing with. Good. He won't understand it. Not because he's not intelligent. Because what he's dealing with is something that has never existed before in his frame of reference, someone with everything he wanted and no interest in the things he wanted it for. He set the quill down, thought for a moment, then picked it back up and wrote one more line, end the Horcruxes. End the war properly. Don't let it become a siege. He folded the notes, put them in the drawer, and went to make tea. The dawn was coming in pink and gold over the manor gardens, and the lavender was sending up its smell through the open window, and somewhere in the house he could hear the first movements of people starting their day, Ron's particular heavy footstep on the stairs, Hermione's quicker, lighter one, Neville's careful navigation of an unfamiliar house. And Harry stood in the kitchen with his tea in the morning and the list of things that needed doing, and felt the particular quality of a person who is not running and not hiding and not afraid. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. Let the war come. He was ready for it. Chapter 6, The New Foundation Fudge didn't come at 30 days. He came at 28, which Harry thought was probably the most honest thing the man had done in years, arriving 2 days early rather than at the deadline because the deadline had the quality of a wall, and walls, when they're close enough, tend to clarify the mind. He came without umbrage, which was either his choice or hers, and Harry suspected hers. He came with 2 ministry solicitors and a prepared statement that was 18 pages long and began with the words "The Ministry of Magic respectfully contests." Harry read the first page standing in the manor's entrance hall and handed it to Hermione without looking up. She read all 18 pages in the time it took Fudge's solicitors to set up their documents on the study table, and by the time they were ready to present their case she had already found the 3 structural weaknesses in it, which she communicated to Harry in a low voice as he walked past her to his chair. Pages 4, 11, and 16, she murmured. For misapplies the 1707 amendment as though it supersedes the original charter, it can't supersede what it derives from. 11 cites a ministry regulation that was itself struck from the books in 1903, which means either their research is bad or they're hoping we haven't read the 1903 records. 16 is actually interesting. They're arguing that the ancient Wisengamot session lacks validity because it was convened below the ministry building without ministry permission. Without ministry permission, Harry repeated quietly. Yes. Do they understand, Harry said, at the same low volume, still walking, that the ancient Wisengamot predates the ministry building by 600 years? I don't think they've fully worked through that implication, no. Harry sat down. Sirius was at the table. Neville was at the table. Bones was at the table. She'd accepted the invitation to observe, not as a ministry representative but in a personal capacity, which was a legal distinction that was holding by a thread but holding. Ron was at the edge of the room in the position he'd been occupying at every meeting for 3 weeks now, which was close enough to participate and far enough back that people consistently underestimated what he was tracking. Fudge sat down across from Harry and looked at him the way he'd been looking at Harry since the corridor confrontation, with the particular unease of a man who keeps expecting something to shift and it keeps not shifting. "Lord Potter," he said. "Minister," Harry said. "Thank you for coming." Yes." Fudge adjusted his hat. The lime green bowler was present, which Harry had come to understand was Fudge's version of armor. "The Ministry has prepared a detailed legal response to the charter notice, which, I've read it," Harry said. Fudge blinked. My advisor read it. She communicated the contents." Harry gestured toward Hermione, who was now sitting with her parchment at a completely neutral expression. "We're happy to address the Ministry's concerns. That's what this meeting is for." The solicitors exchanged a glance. Fudge looked at Harry for a moment with the expression of someone who had prepared for a type of conversation and finds themselves in a different one. "The Ministry's position," he began. "Minister." Harry leaned forward slightly. "I want to be straightforward with you, because I think you're a person who responds better to directness than most people in your position give you credit for." He saw Fudge's expression shift, surprised, and then slightly suspicious, and then something that was almost reluctantly receptive. "The charter notice is legally valid. Your solicitor's argument on page 4 fails because the 1707 amendment derives from the original charter and can't supersede its source document. Your argument on page 11 cites a regulation that was revoked in 1903. And your argument on page 16, he paused. The ancient Wisengamot doesn't need ministry permission to convene in a space that existed before the ministry." Fudge was quiet. "But here's what I actually want to talk about," Harry said. "Because the legal argument is finished, it's finished, Minister, you know it's finished, your solicitors know it's finished, and what's left is what comes next." He looked at Fudge directly. "What comes next doesn't have to be bad for you. It doesn't have to be the end of your career or a criminal proceeding or any of the things Umbridge has probably been telling you it will be." "Dolores," Fudge stopped. "She's been managing your response to this," Harry said. "It wasn't a question. She's been telling you that if you hold the legal ground long enough, something will give, I'll make a mistake, or the ancient Wisengamot session will be challenged on a technicality, or Voldemort will do something that forces me to stop paying attention to the ministry." He held Fudge's gaze. "None of those things are going to happen. But what she hasn't told you, what I suspect she hasn't fully told you, is what she's been doing on her own initiative." Fudge looked at him carefully. "What do you mean? Has she told you about the decree she tried to use to arrest members of the ancient Wisengamot session?" Harry asked. "The one that was retroactively punitive legislation, explicitly prohibited under Founding Charter Article 19. Has she told you she signed that without your countersignature, which means she acted outside her mandate as senior undersecretary?" The solicitors were very still. Fudge's face had gone through a series of rapid transitions and arrived at somewhere complicated. "She said the decree was standard emergency procedure," Harry said. "She told you it was routine." "It wasn't." He reached into his jacket and produced a copy of the decree with a notation in Hermione's handwriting on the margin. He pushed it across the table. "Madam Bones can confirm the procedural violation from a DMLE perspective, if you'd like a ministry voice on it." Bones said, from her seat, in the level and precise tone of someone stating something they verified, "The decree as filed violates 3 procedural requirements under ministry regulation and founding charter law simultaneously. Senior Undersecretary Umbridge issued it unilaterally." Fudge stared at the document. Something in his face was deflating, the particular deflation of a man who has been propped up for a long time by someone else's certainty and is now watching the prop removed. "She's not protecting you," Harry said, more quietly now. "She's protecting a position she believes is right. And in her framework, you're a useful instrument, not a person she's accountable to." He paused. "That's not an attack on her character, she believes what she believes completely. But it means you're currently shouldering legal liability for actions you didn't authorize." The room was very quiet. Fudge looked at the decree for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry. He looked, in this moment, like what he actually was, a man of moderate ability who had found himself in an office too large for him and had been making it work through political instinct and other people's influence for too long, and who was now looking at the accounting of that and finding it heavier than expected. "What do you want?" he said. "A managed transition," Harry said. "Not a collapse. Not a scandal. The founding charter's mandate review gives every department of the ministry an 18-month transition period. Existing law stays in force. Existing staff, including ministers, stay in post, under the new governance structure, until the review determines what the structure requires going forward. You don't lose your position overnight. You gain an oversight framework." He looked at him. "The ministry works better with oversight. Every institution does. That's not an insult to you, it's an argument for better government." Fudge was quiet for a very long time. He looked at the document. He looked at his solicitors. He looked at Harry. "I need time," he said. "You have it," Harry said. "The transition provisions give you a week to formally acknowledge the mandate review. That's your timeline." Fudge stood. His solicitors gathered their documents. At the door he paused and looked back at Harry with an expression that was tired and complicated and more human than anything Harry had seen from him across any table before. "You're very young," he said. "So people keep telling me," Harry said. Fudge left. His solicitors left. The door closed. Sirius exhaled. "That was, not finished," Harry said. "He'll go back, and Umbridge will work on him, and he'll waver." He stood. "Which is why we need to deal with Umbridge today." Umbridge had made her move the previous evening, and it had been, not what Harry had expected. He'd expected another decree. He'd expected a ministry press operation, a carefully managed narrative through the Daily Prophet that painted Harry as a dangerous radical dismantling the foundations of wizarding society. He'd expected legal harassment, procedural challenges, the kind of institutional friction that she was expert at deploying. Instead she'd gone to Hogwarts. She'd arrived the previous evening with a ministry order and attempted to access the Hogwarts founding documents, the original copies, held in a sealed archive under the headmaster's office, which predated the ministry and contained among other things the Slytherin exclusion clause in its original form. Harry had found out from Dumbledore at 9 in the evening by Patronus, and had spent an hour thinking about what it meant before he understood. She wasn't trying to challenge the legal ground. She was trying to destroy evidence. The founding documents at Hogwarts were not the only copies. Gringotts had copies, Harry had copies, the ancient Wisengamot session records referenced them, but in her framework, perhaps, eliminating the most symbolically authoritative version might create enough doubt to stall the process. Or perhaps she understood something about the Hogwarts documents that Harry didn't yet. He'd gone to Hogwarts that morning. Dumbledore had let him in and walked with him to the archive room, and the evidence of Umbridge's visit was clear: a forced door, a broken seal, and an empty case where something had been removed. What was in it? Harry asked. The original Hogwarts founding agreement, Dumbledore said. Signed by all 4 founders. It's the document that established the school's autonomy from all external governing bodies, including any that might exist in the future. He looked at the empty case. It also contains something else. A codicil that was added by Salazar Slytherin before he left, something I've been trying to access for 40 years and couldn't, because it was sealed against anyone who wasn't a Slytherin heir. Harry looked at him. And now? Now there's a Slytherin heir standing in this room, Dumbledore said, and the document is missing. Harry turned this over. She took it because she knew you couldn't open it. She didn't know I exist yet, she took it to use against the founding charter, not to prevent a Slytherin heir from reading the codicil. He paused. Which means she's carrying a document she doesn't know the full value of. Yes, Dumbledore said. And once she reads it, she won't be able to, Harry said. The Slytherin seal. She can't open a Slytherin sealed document without Slytherin blood. She might find a way to destroy it. Then we need it back today. Dumbledore looked at him. There was something in the old man's face that had been shifting over the course of the past few weeks, the careful, managed quality of a man who controls the narrative gradually giving way to something more honest. He reached into his robes and produced the Elder Wand. Harry looked at it. I thought about what you wrote, Dumbledore said. About the soul anchor theory. About the Hallows as a containment framework. He held the wand, not offering it yet. You're right. The three Hallows together create a structure that can expel and contain a soul fragment safely. I've known pieces of this theory for years. I had the wand, and I understood the stone's connection to death magic, and I'd theorized about the cloak's protective properties. But I hadn't put all three together. He paused. Because putting them together meant there was an alternative to the path I'd set you on. And you weren't ready to look at it, Harry said. No, Dumbledore said. I wasn't. He held out the wand. I am now. Harry took it. The Elder Wand was warm in his hand, not the particular warmth of the Potter family magic, not the cool precision of his holly wand, but something that was genuinely different from both, something that felt like touching a live current. He held it carefully, with respect, and felt it settle, not fully, the way his own wand settled, but a working acceptance, the tool acknowledging the user. I still need my own wand for most things, Harry said. Of course, Dumbledore said. The Elder Wand is for one specific thing. One specific thing, Harry agreed. He put the wand carefully in his jacket, separate from his holly wand, and looked at the empty case. Umbridge will be at the ministry. She'll have the document in her office, probably secured with the most complicated wards she knows. Which means, it will be very difficult to retrieve, Dumbledore said. It'll be retrievable, Harry said. Umbridge's office was pink in the way that a wound is pink, aggressively, almost defensively pink, as though the color was working hard to prevent something. Decorative plates with kittens. A fire that had been magically adjusted to burn at a slightly too warm temperature. And on her desk, under three separate locking charms and a shield ward and a containment curse that suggested she knew the document was significant even if she didn't know exactly how, the Hogwarts founding agreement. Harry looked at the wards from the doorway. Getting into the ministry had been straightforward. He was, technically, always allowed to be there, because two of his lordships gave him permanent right of access and one of them gave him access that the ministry couldn't revoke. Getting to Umbridge's office without alerting the whole floor had been a matter of timing and the Potter invisibility cloak, which was still, 15 years after it had been given to his father by Ignotus Peverell's line, the finest and most complete cloak ever made. He studied the wards. The locking charms were standard. The shield ward was ministry-issued, robust but mechanical. The containment curse was interesting, it was keyed to Umbridge's signature, which meant breaking it would trigger an alert. Harry reached into his jacket and took out the Elder Wand. He held it alongside his holly wand, one in each hand, and for a moment felt the two magical signatures interact, his own, flexible and fierce, and the Elder Wand's deep, ancient, absolute. Together they felt like a very large key. He dismantled the wards. Not with force, with precision, layer by layer, each one dissolved cleanly at its foundation, leaving no residue, triggering nothing. The containment curse came apart last, its alert mechanism simply not firing because Harry had unraveled it from below rather than broken it from above. He picked up the founding agreement. The Slytherin seal on the codicil pulsed against his palm, warm, immediate, the same recognition he felt at every claiming. He tucked the document inside his jacket beside the Elder Wand and left Umbridge's office. He was back in the corridor, cloak on, moving toward the lifts, when Umbridge walked around the corner ahead of him. She didn't see him. She walked past within 3 feet, close enough that he could hear her humming something under her breath, close enough to see her face in profile, and what he saw there stopped him for a fraction of a second. Not the controlled public face, the managed pink pleasantness. The private face. Which was frightened. Not of Harry, not directly. She didn't know he was there. She was frightened of something ahead, something in the calculation she was running, and Harry recognized the expression because he'd seen it before in a different context, on a different face. It was the fear of a person who has committed completely to a course of action and is beginning to understand it might fail. She walked on. Harry stood in the corridor under his cloak and watched her go. He could destroy her today. Document, evidence, the DMLE, Bones waiting for exactly this. He had everything he needed to bring a formal case that would end her career completely and possibly result in criminal charges. She had violated founding charter law, ministry procedure, and the Hogwarts Charter. She had destroyed, or attempted to destroy, evidence. She had issued an illegal decree. The case was essentially already made. But standing in the corridor watching her walk away, frightened and alone and committed to a wrong road she didn't know how to leave, Harry felt something that wasn't quite mercy. He wasn't sure he was merciful, exactly, but was adjacent to restraint. The understanding that the most effective thing and the most satisfying thing were not always the same thing, and that building something lasting required choosing the former. He let her go. The document came with him. He'd send the evidence to Bones. Bones would proceed through proper channels. And Umbridge would face what she faced through a process that was clean and documented and unambiguous, not because Harry had decided to be kind to her, but because that was how it was supposed to work. Back at Potter Manor, Hermione read the Hogwarts Founding Agreement codicil out loud. The Slytherin seal opened at Harry's touch without ceremony, just as simple recognition, the parchment responding, the text becoming visible. It was in Old English with a Latin notation in the margin, and Hermione translated in real time with the fluency of someone who had spent 3 weeks reading nothing but old documents, which was apparently enough to develop a functional working knowledge. The codicil read, "Let it be known that the school shall remain sovereign from all outside governance for as long as one heir of any founding family draws breath. In such time, the school's authority in matters of magical education shall be supreme over any ministry, council, or governing body that may arise. Furthermore, in the event that such an heir holds combined lordship of 3 or more founding families, the school shall recognize this heir's authority over its own governance structure, and the heir may, at their discretion, restore the school to its founding educational principles." Sirius looked at Harry. "That means, I can restructure Hogwarts," Harry said. "The curriculum," Hermione said, and her voice had a quality that was very controlled because she was not allowing herself to vibrate at the frequency she actually wanted to vibrate at. "The house system. The board of governors. All of it, it's subject to the founding heir's authority." "Not today," Harry said. "After the war. After the Wisengamot transition." He looked at the codicil. "But it's there. It's in the document." He looked up. Salazar Slytherin, when he left Hogwarts, he left this. Knowing it would be sealed until the right person arrived to open it. He was quiet for a moment. He was trying to fix something he'd broken. In his own way, in the wrong direction, but this, he set the document down. This was an apology. A 400-year apology written into law. Nobody said anything for a moment. "Right," Ron said. "Does anyone want lunch? Because we've been doing historic things since 6 in the morning and I'm genuinely about to expire." Neville laughed, a real laugh, sudden and warm. Hermione unclenched from her translation posture and looked like herself again. Sirius leaned back in his chair with the expression of a man watching something he'd stopped believing was possible actually happen. Harry smiled. "Yes," he said. "Lunch." The Horcrux ritual took a week to design and 3 days to prepare. Hermione built the framework from Salazar's Soul Anchor Notes and the Peverell Vault Theory, cross-referencing every relevant piece of ancient magic literature in the Potter Library, and the result was 17 pages of precise instructions that Harry read 3 times, asked 4 questions about, and then did not read again because the reading again tendency was a form of anxiety that he'd identified in himself and was working on. The components, the resurrection stone, which anchored the soul fragment to the concept of death. The cloak, which Harry wore, severing the fragment's connection to the living world. The Elder Wand, which provided the mechanism for extraction, not destruction, which couldn't be done to a soul piece, but clean, complete removal. And Harry himself, the convergence point, whose combined lordship magic had grown strong enough over 6 weeks of active claiming that the fragment in him was, as Salazar's notes had predicted, no longer dormant background noise but an active and increasingly distressed foreign object in a magical environment that had outgrown it. They did it in the claiming chamber at Serpent's Rest, because the ambient magic of the oldest building in Britain seemed appropriate. Ron stood at the door. Sirius stood at the left wall. Neville at the right. Hermione stood directly behind Harry, with the Slytherin notes in her hands, and she would speak the anchor phrases that kept the extraction contained and directed. Harry stood on the dais, in front of the Slytherin chair, with the stone in his left hand and the Elder Wand in his right, and the cloak over his shoulders, and the holly wand sheathed. "Ready?" Hermione said. "Yes," Harry said. He felt it almost immediately when the ritual began, the stone warming, the cloak tightening around his shoulders, the Elder Wand conducting something he didn't have words for, a deep structural vibration that was operating below the level of sensation, in the place where magic and identity and the architecture of a self intersect. He felt the fragment. Had felt it before as a kind of background pressure, something he'd normalized years ago, but now, with the combined lordship magic active and the ritual framework in place, it was clear and distinct and alien, something that was definitely not him, definitely not supposed to be there, something that had been sitting in the corner of his existence since he was 1 year old, like a splinter so deep it had grown tissue around it. He pushed. Not with force, the notes were clear that force was wrong, would shatter rather than extract, create worse problems. He pushed with his own magic, his own identity, the full presence of who he actually was, Harry Potter and all 4 of his houses, and the accumulated weight of every choice he'd made for 6 weeks, the clarity that had been building since the blood rite, the certainty that had no fear in it. "This is mine," he said, inside himself, to the place where the fragment lived. "You don't belong here. You've never belonged here." The fragment resisted. Of course it did, it was a piece of Voldemort, and Voldemort did not yield to anything, ever, which was one of his central and fatal flaws. But resistance required something to push against, and Harry wasn't pushing against it, he was simply filling the space around it, the way water fills a space until what's floating in it is forced upward. The fragment rose. He felt it moving, upward and outward, through layers of himself that he'd never consciously accessed, and then it was at the surface, and the Elder Wand conducted the extraction with the clean, precise efficiency of a tool that had been made for exactly this purpose, and then it was out. He felt its absence immediately. Felt the space where it had been, the space that had always been there, that he'd thought was just him, that turned out to have been occupied. And the feeling of that space empty and clean and finally his own was, he didn't have words for it. Hermione spoke the containment phrases. The resurrection stone absorbed the fragment, not destroying it but fixing it, holding it separate from the living world, held in the stone the way grief is held in memory, present but no longer active, no longer spreading. The stone closed around it with a finality that Harry felt in his palm. He stood for a moment, breathing. "Harry," Ron said from the door, and his voice was careful in the way it got careful when he was worried. "I'm fine," Harry said. He was more than fine. He felt like a room that has been cluttered for so long that the clutter had seemed normal, and someone had come in and cleared it, and the actual size and light of the room was present for the first time. "I'm really fine." "You're sure?" "Yes." Harry looked at the Elder Wand in his hand. The stone in the other hand. The cloak on his shoulders. All 3 hallows present and used for their proper purpose, not conquest, not immortality, but this, making a wrong thing right. He looked at Hermione. It worked. She had tears running down her face, which she was ignoring with the dignity of someone who has decided that emotions are perfectly acceptable as long as they don't interfere with the recording of results. "Yes," she said. "It worked." She made a note on her parchment. "She's crying," Ron said to Neville. "I can see that," Neville said. I'm noting the results, Hermione said. Shut up. The remaining Horcruxes went faster. The locket, Creature had retrieved it from Grimmauld Place. It was destroyed with the Elder Wand in a contained ritual circle at Potter Manor, the soul fragment it held extracted and fixed to the stone with the same process. Harry felt each extraction like a clean line drawn through something that had been tangled. The cup, Ragnarok arranged access to the Lestrange vault on the grounds of a Wisengamot mandate, filed formally, completely legal, and Hermione went in with 2 witnesses and the Elder Wand and came out 20 minutes later slightly singed and entirely successful. The diadem, the Grey Lady talked to Harry. He didn't have to invoke the Ravenclaw connection or explain his lineage. He simply asked her, quietly, in an empty corridor of Hogwarts where the afternoon light came through the windows at a low summer angle, if she would tell him where her mother's diadem was. And she looked at him for a long time with the particular sadness of someone who has been carrying something for centuries and is very tired of it. "You want to end it," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "Properly." "The Bloody Baron," she began. "Doesn't need to know," Harry said. "This is between us." She told him. The room of requirement, a location he'd known since 5th year, a room that gave you what you needed. He went in, found the diadem in the accumulated centuries of Hogwarts stored things, and brought it out. The Nagini problem he'd thought about for 2 weeks before the answer arrived from an unexpected direction, Neville. "She's a living thing," Neville said one evening in the manor kitchen, not looking up from the herbology book he was reading. "The soul fragment in her is in a living host, different from an object. You can't do the same ritual." "I know," Harry said. "But she's also bound to him by Parseltongue," Neville said. "Which you speak?" "Yes." "So." Neville turned a page. "Speak to her. Tell her to come." Harry looked at him. Neville looked up. "She's a snake. She's been bound to a violent, controlling master her whole life. Tell her there's somewhere else she can be." He paused. "Animals don't want to be Horcruxes. She doesn't know what she is. Tell her to come, and when she comes, do the ritual, and she lives." "If I order her to come," Harry said slowly, "as a Slytherin heir in Parseltongue, she'll have to consider it," Neville said. "She's bound by Parseltongue magic. Your Parseltongue authority outweighs his." He went back to his book with the expression of someone who has said the thing and is done saying it. Harry sent a Parseltongue message into the dark that night, standing in the manor garden under a summer sky full of stars, speaking quietly in the language that had always felt like a thing he'd been given without consent and was only now learning might be a gift. He called Nagini by name and told her, in the language she understood bone deep, that the Slytherin heir commanded her to come to him. She arrived 3 days later. Came across the garden in the early morning, enormous and silent, and Harry met her alone and knelt down and spoke to her, not commanding now, just speaking, the way you speak to something that is frightened and has never been anything but, and she held still under his hand and he did the ritual and extracted the fragment without harming her and she lay in the garden after, free of it, and Harry sat beside her in the wet morning grass for a while. He didn't know what to do with her after that. "Release her," Sirius suggested. "Where?" "Somewhere warm," Hermione said. "She's a Burmese python. She should be in Asia somewhere, actually." Ron arranged it through a Muggle wildlife charity, with considerable creativity and very careful paperwork that didn't mention the original owner. Nagini went south and east, and Harry thought she was probably happier than she'd ever been. All 7 Horcruxes gone. The stone holding 4 of the soul fragments in permanent, harmless stasis. The remaining 3 dispersed as the ritual directed, into the veil between living and dead, which was where they'd belonged all along. Voldemort, somewhere, felt it. Harry could tell, though not precisely how, the connection between them, which had always been there and was now entirely his own, carried a residue that spoke of a vast and sudden and terrifying instability. Like a building that has lost several load-bearing walls and is calculating whether it can still stand. It couldn't. Voldemort came to Potter Manor on a Tuesday. Not alone this time. He brought his inner circle, 12 of them, the best he had, and he came through the wards with considerable force and considerable fire, and the manor wards held for 7 seconds and then admitted the fight because the fight was coming regardless. Harry met him in the front garden. He'd known it was coming, the connection had been giving him increasing signal for 2 days, the quality of it changed now, no soul fragment filtering it, just direct. Voldemort unshielded by the false confidence of his Horcruxes, fully mortal for the first time in decades and knowing it, and the knowledge had done what the knowledge of mortality always does to people who've been running from it, it had made him desperate. Desperate people were dangerous. Harry had thought about this. But desperate people also made mistakes that careful people didn't. The Death Eaters spread across the garden and Harry's people came out of the manor, Sirius, Neville, Ron, Hermione, and Dumbledore, who had been at the manor for 2 days because Harry had told him simply that it was coming and Dumbledore had come without argument. 6 of Bones's Aurors were in the garden's perimeter, brought in through the Wizengamot War Council that had been formally convened 3 weeks earlier. Voldemort stood in the garden and looked at Harry and Harry looked back at him across the lavender beds his grandmother had planted, and the summer evening was golden and the sky was enormous, and for a moment the garden was very still. "Tom," Harry said. The name landed like a stone. "You've taken everything," Voldemort said. Not theatrically, there was no theater left in him. The control was fraying at the edges in ways that were visible, the snake flat effect cracking, something underneath it that was recognizably, disturbingly human. Terrified. "Everything I built, your Horcruxes," Harry said. "Yes. You had no right, the Slytherin Lordship gave me every right," Harry said. "You abandoned the claim. You abandoned the responsibility. You took the power and left the weight of it, and that isn't how inheritance works." He looked at Voldemort steadily, the way he'd looked at him in the window 2 months ago, across the gate in the pre-dawn dark. "You could have been the Slytherin heir. You could have done what I'm doing. You were brilliant enough for it. You were powerful enough for it." He paused. "You just wanted the wrong things." Something moved across Voldemort's face, something old and complicated and possibly never named, the look of a person who has been told a true thing that they already knew and could never afford to admit. Then he cast. The battle in the front garden of Potter Manor lasted 12 minutes and was, by any standard, not even close. Not because Harry was unkillable, he'd never believed he was unkillable, and wasn't. But because Voldemort was fighting someone who wasn't afraid of him, with a plan, on home ground, with 6 weeks of fully active multi-lordship magic behind every cast, and that combination produced a quality of duel that had nothing in common with any of their previous encounters. Harry didn't dodge. He countered. He didn't retreat. He pressed forward, steady, using the terrain he knew, watching Voldemort's casting patterns, which were brilliant but also, for the first time, erratic, the desperation bleeding into the technique. Around them the other fights resolved quickly. Sirius was extraordinary, the 12 years in Azkaban having apparently produced, alongside the damage, a ferocious economical fighting style that had very little patience for extended engagement. Neville took down 2 Death Eaters in succession with a combination of jinxes that made Ron say afterward that he'd been teaching himself dueling theory since 5th year without telling anyone. Dumbledore was simply Dumbledore, which was its own category. Voldemort's last cast was the killing curse. Of course it was. Everything came back to that with him, the single solution, the one that had always worked, the one that had first failed on Harry at 1 year old and had been defining their relationship ever since. Harry moved. Not far. Enough. The curse hit the garden wall and the garden wall did not care. He disarmed Voldemort. The wand, a replacement, not the Elder Wand, sailed out of Voldemort's hand and Voldemort stood in the garden of Potter Manor without a wand for the first time in decades, and for a moment he was perfectly still, and in the stillness he was, visible. In a way Harry had never seen him be visible before. A tall, angular man standing on lavender beds in a summer evening, stripped of everything that had built the monstrousness around him, and underneath it all, a person who had been afraid of death since he was 11 years old and had never once found a way through it. Harry picked up the wand. He didn't return it. "This is over," he said. Voldemort looked at him. The red eyes, even those were changed, somehow, the sharp inhuman quality of them blurring at the edges like a photograph out of focus. The soul, made fully mortal, was no longer the architecture it had been. "You'll have to kill me," he said. "No," Harry said. "I won't. I'll come back. As long as I live, you'll come back to a Wizengamot that has full legal authority and a war council that has real power and a ministry that is answerable to a legitimate governing body," Harry said. "You'll come back to a wizarding Britain that doesn't need you to be afraid of because it has functional institutions and a charter that protects people, including people you spent 50 years telling them weren't worth protecting." He looked at Voldemort steadily. "You've been the only alternative to a broken system. The system isn't broken anymore. So what are you the alternative to?" Voldemort was quiet. "Bind him," Harry said, and two of Bones's aurors moved forward. "Properly witnessed. Full record. Formal arrest under Wizengamot War Council authority, to be tried by the ancient Wizengamot under founding charter law." "A trial," Voldemort said, and something in his voice was strange, not entirely contemptuous. "A trial," Harry said. "With evidence. And due process. And a record that will stand for as long as the charter stands." He met those altered red eyes. "Because that's how it's supposed to work. Even for you." The aurors bound Voldemort, and he let them, which was, not acceptance, not exactly. But the particular absence of further resistance that happens when someone has run out of moves and knows it. The garden was quiet. The evening light had shifted to gold into purple, the summer evening doing what summer evenings do, indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere in the lavender, something small was moving, a bird or a mouse, living its small life in the garden of Potter Manor, which was home and had always been home and was now, finally, actually that. Sirius came and stood beside Harry. They looked at the garden for a moment. "Are you all right?" Sirius said. "Yes," Harry said. "Really?" Harry looked at the garden. The scorch marks on the grass. The wall where the killing curse had hit, slightly blackened. The lavender beds, mostly intact, the smell of them in the evening air. "Yes," he said. "Really?" Fudge resigned at the end of the week. He did it in a written statement that was, in Harry's assessment, the most honest thing he'd published in 6 years, an acknowledgement that the ministry had been operating outside its mandate, that the founding charter review was legitimate and necessary, and a formal concession of the minister's office to the oversight of the ancient Wizengamot pending the appointment of a new minister under the restored governance structure. He did not mention Umbridge. He didn't need to. Umbridge's case had been referred to a charter tribunal by Bones, documented comprehensively, and was proceeding through exactly the clean, witnessed, due process system Harry had described to Voldemort in the garden. The first formal session of the restored Wizengamot was 3 weeks later. The chamber, the one below the ministry, the real one, had been cleaned and the sconces relit and the house sigils were burning steadily in their house colors, and the seats were full for the first time in 200 years. Not every seat, the extinct houses were still empty, would probably always be empty, but the valid seats, the living houses, the people who had been waiting for this room to exist again. Harry sat in the founder's combined seat that the chamber had acknowledged on the day of the first session, the gold and silver and green of the 4 house sigils weaving together in the light, and looked out at the chamber. Hermione was at his right as Wizengamot's secretary, a position that had existed in the original charter and had been one of the omitted elements, restored now and occupied by the only person Harry had ever met who genuinely understood every document it required her to know. Ron was at his left as advisor to the Lord, which was also a founding charter position and which Ron had accepted with the particular combination of self-deprecation and competence that was his defining characteristic. He was already talking quietly to Tiberius Ogden about the procedural calendar. Neville was in the Longbottom seat. His sigil burned. He sat in it the way he sat in everything now, like he'd grown into the space. Sirius was in the black seat, and he looked like himself, the self that Harry had glimpsed in photographs and in Sirius's own stories of who he'd been before Azkaban, the man who was supposed to be here, finally arrived. Dumbledore was not in a seat. He was in the chamber as an observer, having declined the offered advisor position with the grace of someone who understood that the best contribution they could make to this particular moment was to witness it rather than direct it. Harry called the session to order. He looked out at the chamber, old stone and new fire, the accumulated weight of history and the freshness of beginning, and felt the four houses in him, the four streams of something that was not exactly magic but was magic's deeper grammar, the thing that magic runs on, present and integrated and completely, finally, his. He thought about a room at the top of a cottage staircase and a mobile turning above a crib. He thought about 3 drops of blood in a stone basin going gold. He thought about a boy sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs who had absolutely no idea what he was. He thought about all the things that could have gone differently, the 1,000 small points at which a different hand might have set things on a different course, and he let all of it go, the way you let go of a rope you've been holding for a long time, and felt the cleanness of empty hands. The ancient Wizengamot is in session, he said. Founding Charter Authority, full quorum, all charter provisions in effect. He looked around the chamber. First order of business. He paused. The magical creature's rights provision, he said. The one omitted from the 1707 amendment. We're restoring it. From the floor, Griselda Marchbanks said, seconded. The session proceeded. Afterward, Harry walked through the ministry atrium alone. The golden fountain stood in the center, still the same fountain, same proportions, the figures in their arranged hierarchy, and he looked at it as he passed. He'd thought about this fountain several times in the past weeks. The witch at the top, the goblin and the centaur and the house elf arranged below her in a way that had always bothered him even when he didn't have the language for what bothered him. He stopped. He looked at the fountain for a moment. Then he put his holly wand to it and did something that was not destructive, not a blasting curse, nothing violent, but was a careful, deliberate transfiguration of the central structure, the figures rearranging themselves in the water, and what emerged was different. All 5 figures standing level. Looking outward. It was a small thing. The ministry had bigger problems and the Wizengamot had months of work ahead, and the world Harry was trying to build was going to take years and would involve failures and reversals and things he hadn't anticipated, because that was what building things took. But the fountain would be different by tomorrow morning. And different by tomorrow morning was real. He walked out into the London afternoon, summer transitioning into something slightly cooler, the particular quality of August light, clear and angled and beginning its long goodbye, and he stood on the pavement outside the ministry entrance and thought about what came next. The school. The curriculum. The creature's rights provisions. The Azkaban question, because Azkaban was a horror that the founding charter had never authorized, and dealing with it properly was going to be the hardest and most necessary thing the restored Wizengamot would do. The rebuilding of Godric's Hollow, actual building, stone and mortar, magic and intention. The Longbottom rights case, which Neville had filed the day after the session and which was going to open a door for a lot of other families behind him. Voldemort's trial, which was going to be long and complicated and exhausting and completely necessary. All of it ahead. All of it possible. Hedwig landed on his shoulder from somewhere and regarded the street with her usual expression of composed superiority. Yes, Harry said to her. I know. A lot to do. She nibbled his ear, which was either affection or instruction, and then lifted off into the August sky. Harry watched her go. Then he put his hands in his pockets and walked, not running, not hiding, not looking over his shoulder, just walked through the afternoon, one foot in front of the other, into everything that came next.